They say the night shift never really ends. You clock out, but the silence follows you home, clinging to your clothes, whispering through the vents, remembering the names you've already forgotten. Out here, under flickering lights and unfinished prayers, people vanish between breaths, and sometimes something else clocks in. So, welcome to the Little Dream, a place where every story is a report filed in the dark, and every sound you hear might just be the last one left. The Curse of Blackwood Barrow. Have you ever felt a tug at the edge of your mind? A subtle, persistent whisper telling you to turn back, yet an invisible force pushes you forward anyway? That was the feeling gnawing at Angus as he trudged through the mist-laden highlands of Scotland, his boots sinking into the soggy earth with every step. He had walked this path countless times, through fog so thick it seemed to swallow the moonlight. Yet tonight, the world felt different, unearthly, waiting. Angus was a man of scars, not just those etched upon his flesh from the Great War, but the deeper ones carved into his soul by hunger, loss, and the gnawing weight of failure. Poverty clung to him like a second skin, every sleepless night a reminder that he owed the world nothing, yet the world demanded everything. The small sum he had saved could not feed his family for a month, let alone keep a roof over their heads. And tonight, desperation had led him here to Blackwood Barrow, a mound of earth spoken of in hushed tones by villagers who feared its shadow even in daylight. The legends were simple yet chilling. A Celtic chieftain, long dead, buried alongside treasure beyond imagining. Golden trinkets, weapons tipped with silver, ornaments etched with patterns older than memory. But the story spoke also of a curse, whispered among the wary elders, that those who disturbed the resting place of the chieftain would awaken something that did not rest in peace. Many dismissed these tales as old superstition, but Angus and his companions, 7 men drawn by greed and necessity, knew better than to rely on luck. Fear was a luxury none could afford tonight. They approached the mound cautiously. Moss and creeping ivy covered its surface, the earth uneven and strangely warm under their hands. Shadows clung to the dips and hollows like living things. The air was thick with the smell of damp soil and decaying leaves, the kind of scent that sits in your nostrils and refuses to leave. Even the night insects were silent here, as if the mound itself had hushed them in warning. "Is it just me? Or does this place feel wrong?" murmured one of the younger men, his voice barely above a breath. Angus said nothing. He had learned long ago that words in moments like these could weaken resolve. Instead, he let his eyes wander over the mound, noting the slight depression in the soil, the unnatural smoothness in a section near the base. There, beneath a tangle of roots and ivy, a stone door peeked out ancient, engraved with symbols that twisted the mind to decipher, worn by centuries of weather. The entrance had waited long enough. The foreman, a tall, gaunt man, with eyes as sharp as flint, and a grin that suggested both cunning and madness, knelt before it. He fumbled with the fuse of a small charge, his hands steady despite the tension in the air. Angus felt a shiver run down his spine, a warning he could not name. He took a half step back, sensing the pressure of the mound itself against his chest, as though it were inhaling, preparing to exhale something unspeakable. The fuse burned, a crack. Dust and fragments of stone tumbled down, scattering across the earth. The door groaned, a deep, resonant moan like the lament of the dead. When it finally gave way, a rush of air escaped, stale, cold, metallic, and wet, with the scent of soil disturbed only once in centuries. Angus swallowed, a tightness constricting his throat. He knew, without knowing how, that this breath carried more than air. It carried a memory, a warning, a pulse of anger buried deep beneath the ground. They descended slowly into the darkness. The stone steps were slick with moisture, and every footfall echoed back from walls unseen. Shadows stretched unnaturally, reaching and retracting, as though eager to wrap themselves around intruders. Angus's skin prickled. Each moment in the tomb brought a sense of oppression, a weight pressing upon the chest, the kind that made a man doubt his own heartbeat. At the base of the descent, the chamber opened into a space larger than any man had dared imagine. The air here was thicker heavier, tasting of iron and something far fouler decay. Before them stood a solitary statue of a warrior, carved from stone with precision that bordered on reverence. Its hollow eyes seemed to follow, not with malice, but with expectation. It was a sentinel, and Angus felt the pull of its gaze as a physical force, like gravity tugging at his very soul. And there, at the center, lay the sarcophagus, first stone, then bronze, inscribed with symbols that wriggled beneath the gaze, patterns that seemed alive. The bronze lid was cold under Angus's fingertips, smooth, heavy, and yet vibrating faintly, as though something inside stirred at his touch. A faint scratch, almost imperceptible, echoed from the depths. His breath caught. He tried to tell himself it was a trick of the air, a settling of stone, but he knew better. "Do you feel that?" whispered one of the men, voice quivering. Angus could only nod. His mind raced, remembering every tale he had heard as a child, the warnings of villagers, the eerie hush of nights spent near the mound. And now, here he was, touching what had not been touched for centuries. The silence of the chamber was deceptive, a shroud meant to lull the unwary into fatal complacency. The foreman, ever the cynic, laughed softly, ignoring the tremor that ran along the spines of the others. He motioned for the lid to be lifted. With effort and the strain of fear-driven strength, they pried it open. The sound that came forth was immediate, violent, and unforgettable. A scraping, clawing noise that clawed at the walls of the mind, a sound too primal for human comprehension. Angus stumbled back, his heart hammering as if trying to escape his chest, and then they saw it. A figure emerged from the bronze coffin, not quite human, not quite the dead. The chieftain rose, his armor rotted and tarnished, clinging to skeletal limbs that should have crumbled centuries ago. His eyes glowed with a crimson light, nails elongated into vicious claws that scratched and tore at stone. He moved with purpose, deliberate and terrifying, every motion a promise of violence. One of the men cried out and stumbled backward, colliding with the statue, which toppled with a deafening crash, dust and debris filling the chamber. The exit, their only hope, was blocked. Angus realized in that moment that every warning he had ignored, every tale he had scoffed at, every impulse of greed that brought him here, had led to this. The curse was not legend. It was the pulse beneath the earth, the hunger in the eyes of the chieftain, the ancient wrath that had waited patient and eternal. Angus ran. He did not stop until the mound was far behind him, till the chill of the night fog replaced the suffocating weight of the tomb. Yet even as he stumbled through the wet grass, he heard it, a scratching, faint but persistent, echoing in his mind. Night after night the sound returned, growing louder in the silence, reminding him that greed leaves scars no wealth can erase. The chieftain waits, and the mound remembers. Angus's legs trembled with exhaustion, yet he dared not slow his pace. The mound of blackwood had receded behind him, but in the stillness of the highland night, the memory of the chieftain's crimson gaze clung to his mind like a second shadow. He stumbled through bracken and tangled undergrowth, trying to convince himself that the horrors were gone. But as any man who has looked into the impossible knows, some things do not remain buried. They linger in corners of the mind that one cannot sweep clean. That night, the village seemed unusually quiet. Not the comforting quiet of sleeping humans, but a heavy, waiting quiet, as though the hills themselves held their breath. Angus sat by the fire staring into the embers, but the scratching persisted, not loud, not constant, just enough to make him question whether it existed outside his imagination. His companions had scattered after the initial chaos, each too terrified to return. None dared speak of the mound, and Angus did not attempt to summon words. Some fears, he realized, were better felt than spoken. The following evening, compelled by something he could neither name nor resist, Angus returned. The moon was low, a waning crescent casting fractured shadows across the damp earth. He approached the mound cautiously, half hoping he might convince himself that the events of the previous night had been a fevered dream. But the earth was different, warped, alive. The slight depression at the entrance seemed to pulse faintly, as if inhaling the night air and holding it against the world. He knelt at the broken stone doorway, pressing a hand against the cold, slick surface. The chill sank through his gloves and into his bones, and he shivered. It was not fear alone that caused it. It was recognition. Something beneath the mound knew him, had been waiting, and perhaps even remembered his trespass. He descended again, carefully this time, listening intently for the whispers and scratches that haunted the edges of hearing. The passageways beneath Blackwood Barrow were labyrinthine, twisted in ways that seemed unnatural. Stalactites dripped silently, the water cold and tasting faintly of iron. Every step echoed, though the echoes were not predictable. They arrived a beat too late, or too soon, or with a strange resonance that suggested the stone itself was shifting. Angus paused. There was a smell here that was not merely decay. Something older, metallic yet sweet, mingled with the damp earth and the faint, acrid tang of ancient smoke. He could almost hear the whispers of the past in it, voices of those long dead, or perhaps the echoes of the chieftain himself. As he moved deeper, he noticed strange carvings along the walls. Celtic knotwork and symbols he did not recognize, etched with precision and a meticulousness that was unsettling. The symbols seemed to writhe under his gaze, shifting just beyond clarity, provoking a sense of vertigo. He traced a finger along the nearest carving, feeling a vibration beneath his touch, as if the stone itself pulsed with a heartbeat. Slow, deep, deliberate. And then he heard the first real sound, the scraping, the clawing, unmistakable, not far but not near enough to locate, a sound that made him catch his breath in his throat. And yet it was not panic he felt, but a dreadful curiosity, a pull toward the source as irresistible as gravity. "Who's there?" His voice was low, hesitant. No answer came, only the faint, unsteady echo of the words bouncing back to him. He swallowed, trying to steady his nerves, yet each step forward made the sound grow sharper, more insistent. The scratching was accompanied now by a whisper, faint and almost inaudible, like words spoken just beneath the surface of comprehension. He followed the corridor to a chamber larger than any room above ground, its ceiling lost in shadow. The walls were lined with alcoves, each containing a stone slab or sarcophagus, some sealed, some open and empty. The smell of earth and metal was stronger here, thicker, more insistent. Angus felt his pulse spike. The air seemed to press against him, dense and viscous, as though the chamber itself was breathing around him. He stepped toward a bronze sarcophagus in the center. Its lid was slightly ajar. Angus hesitated. Every rational part of his mind screamed to step back, to flee, to leave this place to its darkness. But another part, a part he barely recognized, urged him forward. He pressed a hand to the lid and peered inside. The bronze surface was cold, impossibly so, and beneath the shadow of the lid something stirred, not movement that belonged to the living, but a shiver of presence, a pulse of awareness. Angus's breath caught. The eyes of the chieftain burned in his memory, crimson and malevolent, and he understood, with a clarity that chilled him, that the figure beneath the lid had not been alone. A faint whisper, unintelligible, brushed against his ear, carried by the damp, stagnant air. The symbols along the walls seemed to hum in response, vibrating in a rhythm that made his teeth chatter. Angus realized then that this place was alive, not in the conventional sense, but in the sense that it remembered, that it reacted, that it judged. Every step, every movement was noticed, every thought was felt, and then came the sound that froze him to the spot. A low, dragging noise, deliberate and slow, echoing through the chamber, growing louder with every heartbeat. Angus turned slowly, every muscle coiled in terror, and glimpsed movement in the shadows, a silhouette emerging, shifting in a way that was both human and grotesque. The chieftain had returned. His armor, rotted and tarnished, clung to his frame, and the red gleam of his eyes pierced the darkness. His claws scraped the stone floor, echoing like nails on slate. Angus felt the heat of fear rise in his chest, sharp and almost tangible. The creature moved toward the walls, toward the alcoves, as though inspecting, choosing, judging. And when he reached the nearest sarcophagus, a sudden realization struck him. These were not just tombs. They were warnings. Each slab, Each coffin contained remnants of men and women who had dared enter before. Their fates whispered through the carvings etched into the walls. The chieftain's steps were precise, deliberate, each motion accompanied by the faintest trace of a growl, low and resonant, vibrating through the marrow of Angus's bones. He backed away slowly, desperate not to attract attention. Every instinct screamed at him to flee. Yet the exit, the broken stone doorway, seemed impossibly far now. The corridor twisted unnaturally, lengthening as he moved, as if the mound itself was reshaping to trap him. Panic rose like a tide, but he forced himself to breathe, to observe, to think. The whispering continued, growing louder, almost intelligible. Words, names perhaps, murmured in a language lost to time, curling around his mind, dredging memories he did not know he had. The air thickened, carrying a taste of rust, of iron, of decay, of something sweet and unbearable. Angus felt a shiver crawl up his spine, as though unseen fingers traced his vertebrae. He wondered if the mound remembered him from the night before, remembered his trespass and now watched with patience. A sudden noise made him jump, a low thud, then a shuffle. From the far end of the chamber, the chieftain emerged fully, moving with a horrifying grace. His skeletal frame was wrapped in remnants of armor, the metal etched with runes that glowed faintly in the dim light. Every step was deliberate, calculated. The scraping of his claws echoed against the stone, a rhythm that set Angus's pulse racing. He realized then, with a terrible clarity, that he was not merely intruding on a grave. He was entering a living memory, a consciousness older than the earth itself, and the chieftain was its sentinel, awakened and patient, bound to punish those who dared disturb the sacred rest. Angus stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the uneven floor. His hands brushed against the walls, the carvings shifting beneath his touch. He pressed himself against the stone, willing himself to vanish, to become part of the shadows. The whispering grew more insistent, wrapping around his thoughts, pulling at the edges of his mind, reminding him of what he had touched, what he had disturbed. And then came a voice not spoken, not heard, but felt. Deep inside him, resonant and ancient, echoing through every nerve. Greed buries itself alongside the living. The mound remembers, and it does not forgive. Angus froze. Sweat ran down his temples. His chest heaved. The pulse of the mound, the awareness of the chieftain, the whispering in the walls, it was all around him. And he understood, fully and irrevocably, that leaving this place alive would not be a gift, but a challenge. One misstep, one glance, and he would become another whisper in the stone, another warning for those who came after. He turned slowly, eyes fixed on the exit, but the corridor had changed again. The stone seemed to stretch, elongate, and coil, mocking his memory of the path. Every step he took echoed, but not as he expected. The sound returned, altered, as though the walls themselves were breathing in tandem with the chieftain's steps. And then, silence. A silence so complete it pressed against his ears, his skull, his chest. And in that silence, he heard it once more, the faint scratching, closer, patient, waiting, a reminder that the chieftain watched, that the mound remembered, that Angus had entered a world where greed was the key to awakening horrors that would never forgive. And yet, some part of him, perhaps the same part that had returned tonight despite all reason, could not resist stepping forward again, drawn deeper into the maze beneath Blackwood Barrow, where the dead did not sleep, and the whispers never ceased. Angus moved through the twisting corridors of Blackwood Barrow with a careful, almost reverent caution, though the weight of dread pressed against his ribs with every step. The mound had changed since his last descent. Passageways that had seemed straightforward now coiled unpredictably, turning back upon themselves. Shadows pooled in the corners, thick and malleable, as if the darkness had taken on a life of its own. The faint whispering persisted, rising and falling like the breath of some immense creature beneath the earth. Angus could feel it curling around his mind, teasing at memories he did not know he possessed, dredging up fears long buried. He pressed a hand to the wall, tracing the carvings etched into the stone. They writhed under his fingertips, shifting subtly, as though acknowledging his presence. Ancient symbols spoke of death and warning, of promises made and broken, and the power that had been sealed beneath the mound for centuries. A low, deliberate scratching echoed through the chamber ahead. It was no longer faint or hesitant. It was confident, purposeful, announcing the presence of something that had been awakened. Angus's heart thundered in his chest. He pressed himself against the stone, peering around the corner into a larger chamber. There he saw it. The chieftain, fully risen, more terrifying than memory or imagination could conjure. Its armor, corroded and jagged, clung to a form that should have decayed entirely. Crimson eyes glowed beneath a furrowed brow of stone-like flesh. Its claws scraped the floor as it advanced with a measured, almost ceremonial step. And in its wake, the chamber seemed to shift, the air thickening, vibrating, pulsing with a malevolent rhythm that matched Angus's heartbeat. Angus's companions, those who had not fled in terror the night before, were nowhere to be seen. He realized with a sinking certainty that some had already succumbed, drawn into the chieftain's wrath or swallowed by the shifting corridors. The mound did not merely punish intrusion. It curated it, selecting and isolating, drawing victims into its labyrinth until the final reckoning. A sudden breeze, or was it the breath of the chieftain itself, whipped through the chamber, carrying a metallic scent, the tang of rust, and something fouler, the unmistakable aroma of ancient blood. Angus stumbled back, pressing his hand to his mouth to stifle a scream. The bronze sarcophagi around him rattled slightly, as if acknowledging the presence of their master. And then the chieftain spoke not in words, but in a vibration that resonated within Angus's bones. A whisper older than memory, a command that left no room for doubt. You have come for what is not yours. You shall know what it means to disturb the rest of the dead. Angus's mind raced. He had expected horror, perhaps even death, but this was something older, smarter, infinitely patient. The chieftain did not merely kill. It observed, assessed, and enacted judgment. Angus knew he could not fight, not in any conventional sense. Yet flight was no guarantee either. The mound itself shifted, reshaping passageways, concealing exits, and amplifying the chieftain's presence with each heartbeat. He crouched behind a toppled sarcophagus, feeling the cold, rough stone press against his palms. His eyes scanned the chamber, noting the small alcoves and niches carved into the walls. Each held relics of past interments, weapons dulled by age, fragments of bone, trinkets of gold tarnished to dull bronze. The chieftain's gaze swept across them, and Angus imagined the whispers that must have accompanied each burial, promises and oaths whispered to the dead, binding them to this place. A clatter from across the chamber snapped Angus's attention to the right. One of the younger men, pale and trembling, had stumbled into view, eyes wide with terror. He froze, and the chieftain's eyes locked onto him. Angus could almost see the calculation in the chieftain's movement. A predator assessing a threat, deciding who would live, who would serve as example. The young man let out a strangled cry and bolted. The chieftain's movement was astonishingly fast. In a blur it advanced, one claw striking the stone floor with a force that sent shards of rubble skittering across the chamber. The young man disappeared beneath the shadow of the chieftain's towering frame, and a scream echoed, abruptly cut off. Angus's stomach turned. He realized he could not linger. The mound's intelligence was absolute, and delay was death. He ran, crouching low, hugging the walls as best he could. Corridors twisted unexpectedly. Stairways that should have led upward now spiraled deeper, forcing him downward into the labyrinth's bowels. The whispering followed him, a soft, mocking chorus. The greed of men, the greed of men, the greed of men. It was a refrain that seemed to seep into his blood, making his legs heavier, his breath shorter. A sudden chamber opened before him, illuminated faintly by the phosphorescent gleam of moss clinging to the walls. In the center lay a series of runes etched directly into the stone floor. Angus froze, noting the precision of the carvings. They formed a pattern that pulsed with energy, subtle but undeniable. Something about them, felt like a lock, a seal designed to contain what resided within the mound. His mind raced. Was this a protective measure or a warning? The chieftain's presence grew stronger. Angus could feel it not through sight, but through a prickling on his skin, a pressure in the air, and the unmistakable vibration beneath his feet. He understood instinctively that the creature was aware of him, not just of his body, but of his intent, his very thoughts. The chieftain had risen fully, no longer confined to a sarcophagus, and its wrath was a tide that would not be denied. He stepped carefully onto the runes, feeling the cold stone beneath his feet. The vibration intensified, thrumming in rhythm with his heartbeat. He tried to move slowly, deliberately, thinking to avoid triggering whatever magic or curse lay in the etchings. But the mound had a mind of its own. The air thickened further, carrying a scent of iron and decay, tinged with an almost sweet rot. Angus gagged slightly, pressing his hand to his mouth again. A sudden crack reverberated through the chamber. One of the alcoves shifted, revealing a hidden passage that seemed to descend even deeper. Without thinking, Angus moved toward it, driven by the vague hope that the mound might allow an escape if he continued downward. Behind him, the chieftain advanced, a silent, unstoppable force. Every step it took echoed in his mind, a drumbeat of judgment. The passage narrowed, forcing him to stoop. The walls were slick, covered in a film of moisture that made each step treacherous. The scratching followed, now accompanied by a low, almost guttural rumble, like stone grinding against stone. Angus's hand slipped against the wall. He caught himself on a protruding root, the bark rough against his palms. The further he descended, the heavier the air became, each breath a struggle, each heartbeat a drum of terror. And then, a voice clearer this time, resonant in his mind, spoke in the language of the ancients. The greed of men awakens what sleeps, and what sleeps shall claim what is owed. Angus stumbled, nearly collapsing. The meaning was unmistakable. Those who entered the mound seeking treasure did not merely face death. They became part of the mound's memory, its warning, its eternal sentence. Ahead, faint light glimmered. It was not natural, but a soft glow emanating from the walls themselves, illuminating carvings depicting warriors, battles, and rituals that seemed to stretch across centuries. Among them, Angus saw a figure, unmistakably resembling the chieftain, depicted with eyes of fire, hands clawed, standing over those who had trespassed. The image resonated with the room, vibrating with a terrible authority. He realized then that this was the heart of the curse. The chieftain had not merely been buried here. He had been bound, sealed, and empowered. And now, with every step, every intrusion, the seal weakened. The chieftain's power reasserted itself, reshaping the mound to punish, to terrify, to ensnare. Angus's breath came in ragged gasps. He had no weapons, no allies, no plan. Only instinct, terror, and a desperate will to survive. He pressed on, hoping that movement would keep the creature at bay, that the labyrinth's twisting corridors might protect him, that the ancient runes might still hold power enough to delay the inevitable. And somewhere behind him he knew the chieftain was moving, patient, deliberate, unstoppable. The sound of claws scraping stone echoed faintly, then louder, then vanishing, leaving only the whisper, "The greed of men, the greed of men, the greed of men." Angus understood, fully and irrevocably, that the mound remembered, that the curse had awakened, and that he had only begun to pay the price for his curiosity. Angus pressed himself against the cold stone wall, his breath ragged, each inhalation sharp and trembling. The labyrinth beneath Blackwood Barrow seemed alive now, corridors twisting unnaturally, stairways curling upon themselves as if mocking his attempts to escape. The whispers had grown insistent, almost sentient, circling his mind. The greed of men, the greed of men, the greed of men. They were not just echoes of the past, they were a summons, a warning, a chain pulling him ever deeper. Every instinct screamed for flight, yet his legs refused to carry him. He could sense the chieftain nearby, not merely a presence, but a consciousness, ancient and wrathful, that pressed against the walls and floors, radiating a heat that was not warmth, but menace. The faint glow of phosphorescent moss cast eerie shadows, revealing glimpses of stone carvings, warriors kneeling, coffins cracked open, skeletal hands reaching toward unseen treasures. Each image throbbed with memory, with power, and Angus felt it all weigh upon him. A low scraping echoed behind him, claws against stone, slow, deliberate, echoing through the passageways. Angus's stomach knotted. The sound was a promise. He rounded a corner and froze. The chieftain stood there. Its armor, a corroded tapestry of centuries, reflected faint light. Eyes glowing crimson, it exhaled a breath that carried the metallic tang of blood and decay. Angus tried to back away, but the corridor behind him had vanished. Stone walls spiraled inward, sealing him in. The chieftain's gaze followed every movement. Its claws scraped against the floor again, sending vibrations up through Angus's feet. And then came the voice, not words, but a vibration felt in the bones, resonating with an ancient authority. You have come for what is not yours. The mound remembers, and it shall consume all that is greedy. Angus's mind raced. He had no weapons, no plan, only terror, instinct, and the faint glimmer of wit that had kept him alive so far. He knew that brute force would not suffice. The chieftain was no mere corpse, no mere specter. It was a guardian, a curse made flesh, empowered by centuries of ritual and blood. Yet survival demanded action. He scanned the chamber. Runes carved into the stone floor pulsed faintly, a rhythm that seemed to synchronize with his heartbeat. Perhaps these were a key. Perhaps they were a trap. He did not know. He could only act. A step. The chieftain advanced. Each movement deliberate, echoing like a drum of judgment. Its claws scraped, struck the walls, sending shards of stone tumbling. Angus darted forward, skimming over the runes, hoping the patterns might shield him, confuse the chieftain, or at least buy precious seconds. The chamber seemed to stretch and bend around him, corridors curling back as if the mound itself sought to disorient him. And then he saw it. A relic. A bronze dagger etched with the same symbols as the sarcophagi. It lay in a shallow alcove, almost as if offered. Angus lunged, snatched it, and felt a chill run through his veins. The dagger was impossibly cold, vibrating faintly, as though alive with the memory of its maker. He gripped it tightly. The chieftain reacted instantly. Its eyes flared brighter, claws scratching the floor with a fury that shook the chamber. Angus knew that the coming confrontation would not be simple. It would not be mortal combat. This was a battle of wits, courage, and endurance, a struggle against the embodiment of a curse older than any man could comprehend. He circled the chamber, keeping the dagger between him and the chieftain. The creature mirrored his movements, slow, deliberate, never reckless, always patient. Angus's mind raced. The carvings on the walls, the runes underfoot, even the phosphorescent moss, everything seemed to hum with power, reacting to the presence of the chieftain. Perhaps the mound itself could be weaponized, if he could only understand its rules. A flash of thought struck him. The runes, they were protective, not against the chieftain's presence entirely, but against his immediate attack. If he could keep the creature at a distance, channel it along the patterns etched into the stone, perhaps he could trap it, if only temporarily. He darted along the path, following the rhythm of the carvings, luring the chieftain into a circuit. It hesitated. A brief pause, then advanced with renewed determination. Its claws struck the stone, scraping and tearing, and Angus felt the vibrations travel up his arms, into his chest, like the pulse of the earth itself. Sweat poured down his face, but he pressed on, channeling every ounce of his focus into the dance between predator and prey. Then came the moment of recognition. The dagger responded, vibrating against his hand. It seemed to resonate with the runes beneath his feet. A low hum filled the chamber, the whispers rising into a crescendo. The chieftain hesitated, its crimson eyes narrowing, claws raised. Angus felt the first flicker of hope. The mound could be weaponized if only he maintained the rhythm, followed the patterns, respected the ancient rules. The confrontation escalated. Angus darted through alcoves, ledges, and corridors, the chieftain pursuing, relentless, yet methodical. Each step along the runes seemed to sap the creature, forcing it to hesitate, to measure, to consider. Angus could feel the centuries of curse pressing against him, trying to drive him into error, into greed, into death, but he refused. Every thought, every movement was calculated, a careful negotiation with the forces beneath the earth. And then, the chamber shook. Stone fragments tumbled. Dust filled the air. The chieftain roared, a sound not entirely of this world, vibrating through Angus's bones, shaking the very air. But he did not falter. He thrust the dagger forward, not to harm, but to anchor himself, to complete the pattern etched into the floor. The runes glowed faintly beneath his feet, a soft luminescence that matched the rhythm of the dagger. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The chieftain paused, claws raised, eyes blazing. Angus's heart pounded, each beat a drum of survival. The mound trembled, ancient power awakening, responding to his intent. The whispers rose to a fevered pitch, echoing in every corner of the labyrinth. The greed of men, the greed of men, the greed of men. Then, with a sound like cracking stone, the chieftain recoiled, its form flickering, almost ethereal. Angus felt the ground shift beneath him, the chamber itself bending, reshaping. The runes glowed brighter, pulsing in tandem with the dagger. And for a fleeting instant, the creature seemed trapped, bound, contained by the very patterns that had been etched into the mound centuries before. Angus stumbled back, chest heaving, sweat and dirt coating his skin. He knew this reprieve would not last. The chieftain was patient, immortal, a sentinel of the earth itself. But for now, he had survived the confrontation. The mound had recognized his respect, his careful observation, his avoidance of greed. He had faced the curse directly and lived, yet even as he caught his breath, he could feel it. The mound remembered. The whispers continued, softer now, yet no less insistent. The chieftain's eyes still burned in his memory, and he knew that the battle was not over. The confrontation had ended, but the war, the curse, the punishment, the eternal vigilance of Blackwood Barrow remained. Angus pressed the dagger to the stone, tracing the runes one final time, committing the rhythm, the pattern, to memory. If he were to leave, to survive, he would need every fragment of this knowledge. The mound's heart beat beneath him, slow, deliberate, eternal, and the whispers, they were not finished. Greed buries itself alongside the living. The mound remembers, and it does not forgive. Angus exhaled, a shudder running through him. The confrontation had revealed much, but the chieftain awaited, patient and eternal, beneath the earth. And Angus knew one undeniable truth. To leave Blackwood Barrow alive, he would need cunning, courage, and perhaps a sacrifice the mound demanded. The chill of dawn had yet to arrive. Though Angus stumbled back through the highland forest, emerging from the tangle of roots and bracken into the first pale hints of morning. He was drenched in sweat. Grime streaked across his face, hands scraped raw from the stone corridors, and the dagger still clutched tightly in his shaking fingers. The mound behind him was silent, deceptively still, as if the horrors of the night had never been awakened. Yet he knew better. Every instinct screamed at him to run further, to never look back, to escape the memory of the crimson eyes, the scraping claws, the whispers that had followed him like a curse. But even as he stumbled through the misty terrain, the mound had already imprinted itself upon him. Angus could feel the pulse of the chieftain beneath the earth, slow and deliberate, a heartbeat that would never truly cease. He reached the village as the first rays of sunlight pierced the horizon, casting weak gold across the thatched roofs. Empty windows stared back at him, the streets eerily silent. Not the comforting quiet of rest, but a void, a hollow absence that seemed to mirror the emptiness in his chest. The villagers would greet him, perhaps, with curiosity or concern, but he could not face them. Not yet. Not ever, perhaps. In his small room above the tavern, Angus laid the dagger upon the floor. It felt alive under his fingertips, humming faintly with an energy that he could neither name nor dispel. Its coldness seeped into his skin, and he realized that the object itself had absorbed a fragment of the mound's will. Every heartbeat of the chieftain beneath the hill seemed to echo through it. It was a conduit, a warning, a remnant of the curse that would not release him. Sleep eluded him. He sat by the hearth, staring into the dying embers. Each flicker of flame brought the memory of the underground corridors, the bronze sarcophagi, the carvings shifting beneath his touch. He recalled the whispers, the pulsing runes, the chieftain's deliberate, unstoppable approach. And then there was the dagger, vibrating softly as though attuned to the heartbeat beneath the mound. Night came again, and with it the memory returned in full. Shadows lengthened across the room, taking forms that his mind could almost but not quite name. The faint scrape of claws against stone, the rustle of moss and roots shifting in unnatural ways, haunted the edges of his hearing. Angus understood that the mound had not released him. It had merely postponed judgment. The villagers noticed the change. Angus's eyes carried a haunted look, his movements jittery and careful. He spoke little, ate little, and the tales he once shared of the highland forests and the village history became fragmented, edged with fear and hesitation. No one dared ask the details of his journey, and he would not offer them. There are some truths, he realized, that when spoken aloud, summon the very horrors one hopes to avoid. The dagger remained on the floor beside his bed. Sometimes he thought he felt its pulse under his fingertips, faint but insistent, a reminder that the chieftain's consciousness lingered, tethered to him through the relic. He dared not dispose of it, for fear of what the mound might do should it be severed from his awareness. And yet he could not ignore it. The artifact was a constant, insistent reminder of the greed that had summoned the curse and the fragility of the living in the face of ancient power. Weeks passed, but Angus did not find solace. Each night brought the whispers, now fainter, yet no less disturbing. Sometimes he imagined they had changed, carrying his name, insinuating themselves into his consciousness. Angus, Angus, the greed of men awakens, and the mound remembers. Sleep was a fragile state. Each doze a tightrope over the abyss of memory and nightmare. Occasionally, he would hear scratching at the edges of the village, soft, patient, deliberate. The sound would vanish when approached, leaving only the faint metallic tang of iron in the air. He knew what it meant. The chieftain was still awake, still present, still bound to Blackwood Barrow, yet aware of him, tracking him, measuring his fear. No matter how far he traveled, no matter how far he fled, the curse had planted itself within him. Angus began to write. Not letters, not diaries, but careful transcriptions of the runes, of the carvings, of the patterns in the mound's corridors, and the sequence of his survival. The pages filled quickly with trembling hands, ink smudged by sweat and trembling fingers. He hoped that one day, someone might read them, and perhaps avoid the same fate. Or perhaps, he realized bitterly, the act of writing merely drew the mound's attention closer, anchoring the curse within the words themselves. In the dead hours of the night, he would hear the faintest rattle of stone, a scraping sound just beyond perception. Sometimes he would glimpse shadows moving across the walls of his room, unnatural shapes that vanished when he turned. The dagger, always near, would pulse faintly, a heartbeat that was not his own. And through it all, he understood that the curse was patient, immortal, indifferent to time or reason. Years passed, and Angus aged, but the mound never released its hold. The village eventually forgot the details of that night, as fear and superstition often fade into rumor and myth. Yet Angus remembered. He remembered the pulse beneath the earth, the whispers, the chieftain's eyes, and the lesson carved into his very being. Greed draws the dead from their rest, and curiosity can awaken horrors that endure beyond comprehension. Sometimes, when the wind blew just right, carrying the scent of damp earth and iron, Angus thought he could hear it. Faint scratching, the echo of claws against stone, a whisper that beckoned from far below Blackwood Barrow. And in those moments he felt the weight of the mound's gaze, patient, unyielding, eternal. He realized with a grim clarity that the mound had not merely been disturbed. It had claimed him, not in body, but in essence. He was a living witness, a conduit, a reminder that the dead do not rest when greed beckons. The chieftain's curse had endured, and through Angus, it would endure still. Even as the hearth's fire dimmed to embers, even as the first light of dawn crept through the window, Angus knew that he would never truly be free. Every shadow held a memory, every whisper carried warning, and every heartbeat reminded him that the mound beneath Blackwood Barrow was awake, patient, and eternal. The curse had begun with greed. It would endure through him, and one day, perhaps, it would claim another, rising from the depths to remind the living that some treasures are never meant to be unearthed. And somewhere, deep below the earth, a low scratching began again, patient, deliberate, echoing through stone corridors older than time itself. The coachman's cargo, Jedediah, Jed Crawford, had spent nearly his entire life on the winding trails that cut through the Appalachian foothills, a driver of horse-drawn wagons, carrying goods between isolated settlements. By reputation alone, he was fearless, able to handle a spook team of horses or navigate treacherous switchbacks where a misstep could send cart and driver tumbling hundreds of feet into the misty valleys below. This evening, however, the familiar certainty of his skill did little to quell the uneasy feeling that settled like a stone in the pit of his stomach. The sun had dipped behind the ridges, leaving the sky a bruised mix of purples and ash gray. Shadows stretched long across the dirt trail, twisting the shapes of gnarled trees and overhanging rocks into forms that seemed almost human. Every hoofbeat of his two horses struck a hollow cadence, echoing against the hills, and in that echo, Jed thought he heard something else, something that didn't belong to the rhythm of his team. He glanced down at the cargo. Among the barrels of salted pork, sacks of grain, and crates of tools, a single item sat out of place. An old hand-carved axe he had taken from a deserted trapper's shack earlier that week. The head of the axe was etched with strange, looping patterns that twisted in the flickering lantern light. He had assumed it was simply a relic, a curiosity of the old woods, but ever since he had placed it in his wagon, a certain weight had pressed against his chest, a tugging unease that no amount of distance could dissipate. The first night fog began to settle, curling around the wheels and trailing behind his horses like ghostly fingers. Jed tightened his grip on the reins, the leather slick with sweat. Somewhere in the underbrush, a snapping twig sounded out of time with the natural rhythm of the trail. At first, he thought it a deer, a fox, or perhaps a loose stone kicked by a hoof. But the sound repeated, slow and deliberate, echoing from the right, then left, never quite matching the pace of the horses. A chill ran down his spine. Jed's ears strained. The wind carried a strange metallic tang, not the scent of the iron axe head, but something coppery, visceral, and unmistakably alive. He glanced over his shoulder, nothing but mist and dark shapes of the forest. Yet the sound persisted. Footsteps, heavy, dragging, deliberate, not matching the trot of his horses, but following, mirroring him in some impossible way. "Who's there?" Jed barked into the darkness. His voice cracked like the whip he carried, shattering the fog. Silence answered him at first. Then, a slower, heavier step, measured, deliberate. Something was moving behind him, but not quite human, not quite beast. His stomach knotted, and he dug a finger into the small wound on his hand, letting a drop of blood fall onto the handle of the axe. Folk tales passed down through his family spoke of wards, charms, and old blood. Instinct told him this was no ordinary night. He watched as the patterns etched into the axe seemed to darken, as if soaking up the drop of blood. A faint vibration ran up the handle. Somewhere deep in the woods, a branch snapped sharply, and the horses shivered violently. The fog pressed closer, swallowing the light of his lantern, making the road ahead a smear of gray. Jed's heart thumped a rapid, uneven rhythm as he muttered to himself, half a prayer, half a warning. "Stay back. Stay away." The wagon jolted as a branch snagged the wheel. Jed cursed, adjusting the reins, forcing his animals forward. But the sound of the steps did not abate. If anything, it grew more confident, more taunting, pacing behind him like some hidden observer. Jed dared not turn again. He had learned that creatures of the woods, living or not, disliked direct confrontation. He gripped the axe tighter, the leather wrapping cold and unyielding against his palm, and urged his horses onward. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time had begun to lose meaning on this road. Mist rose and fell in unnatural waves, the trees bending oddly, as though observing him. Then, from the edge of his lantern's glow, he saw it. A shadow detaching from the fog, slow, deliberate, and impossibly still. The shape paused as he drew closer. One step, then another. It did not match the rhythm of the hooves. Not animal, not human. Jed's breath caught in his throat. He reached for the axe. The shadow shivered, and then a voice, guttural, low, carrying a rasp that seemed to vibrate inside his skull. Jed, Jed. Jed's skin crawled. He threw a drop of his own blood onto the axe again. The shadow halted, recoiling slightly, then advanced once more, circling the wagon. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple as he muttered old incantations his grandmother had whispered to him in his youth. Words meant to keep the restless dead in their graves, to bind what should not walk in the night. The shadow hissed, a sound like metal scraping stone. Jed's eyes widened as he realized it was not alone. Shapes vague, flickering, monstrous lurched in the corners of the fog, surrounding the wagon, following him. Each step they took echoed not in sound, but in weight, pressing into the soil, vibrating against the wooden frame of his cart. The axe felt alive in his hand, pulsing in rhythm with the beating of his heart and the dark promise in the shadows. Finally, a clearing appeared, a small outpost, a cabin flickering with lantern light in the distance. Jed's grip on the reins tightened, urging the horses forward. Every muscle in his body screamed to run faster, though he knew even a sprint could not outrun what followed. The shadows lingered at the edge of the fog, scraping closer, patient, deliberate. He arrived at the cabin and flung open the door, stumbling inside. The warmth of the hearth barely reached him. The air smelled of smoke and stale beer. The innkeeper, a stout man with kind eyes, raised an eyebrow. "Jed? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Hem." Jed could only point at the axe, now resting on the floor between them. "It's cursed," he said, voice trembling. Do not wash it. Do not touch it with water. Just burn it, but carefully. Let the fire claim it, not the water." The innkeeper nodded slowly, unsure of the warning, but sensing the fear that clung to Jed like a second skin. He sent a young cook to tend the fire. Flames licked at the axe slowly, the wood around the half smoking, the carved patterns glowing faintly in response. Jed's chest heaved as the shadows outside seemed to pause, their murmurs barely audible through the cabin walls. Then, an impulsive act of ignorance shattered the precaution. The cook, thinking to hasten the burning, doused the axe with a bucket of water. The sizzle and hiss were immediate, violent. Smoke roared, and the fire sputtered. Jed yelped in horror as the axe vanished in a flash of dark flame and steam. The shadows outside shifted violently, recoiling for a heartbeat, then surged forward, redoubled, patient, relentless. Jed grabbed the lantern, stepping out into the mist. Nothing moved at first. The road was empty. Then, a whisper, low and wet, echoed from the trees. "Jed, the meat tonight will be fine. Jed." A chill ran down his spine. The curse had not been destroyed. The axe, the cargo, had returned to him in some other form, unseen, hungering, waiting. Jed swung the lantern, daring it to appear. The wind carried a faint metallic tang, the smell of old iron and blood, into his nostrils. He muttered threats, cursed the object, promised fire and ash. The whispering ceased, but Jed knew, with a gnawing certainty, that it was merely patient. He climbed back into his wagon, gripping the reins. The road stretched before him long, empty, suffused with mist. Hoofbeats echoed. The wind whispered through the trees. Jed rode on, every sense alert, every shadow suspect. And in the far distance carried faintly by the night air. He could hear it, the low, rasping, deliberate sound of claws or metal scraping earth, patient, relentless, eternal. He would never again see the road the same. Every darkened path, every shadowed trail, carried the weight of the cargo, the memory of its hunger, the knowledge that some objects, once touched by greed and curiosity, are never truly gone. And as he urged his horses forward, lantern swaying, heart pounding, Jed knew one undeniable truth. The coachman's cargo would return. Always. Waiting. Watching. The night had settled like a thick, suffocating blanket over the Appalachian ridges. Jedediah Crawford's wagon creaked under its load as the horses picked their way over the uneven trail, hoofbeats hollow in the quiet. The memory of the cursed axe, the cargo, haunted him with every step, though he had escaped the immediate terror at the inn. The sense of being watched never left him. Shadows flickered at the edge of his vision. The wind whispered through the skeletal trees, and somewhere in the distance, the low, rasping hum of something ancient and patient drifted across the hills. Jed's hands were raw from gripping the reins. His back ached from tension and fear, muscles taut with anticipation. Every sense was heightened. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves made him flinch. He had thought that by fleeing, by putting miles between himself and the inn, he could leave the horror behind. But the cargo had a will of its own, and Jed knew it moved differently than any living being. It did not rush. It did not tire. It waited, watching, patient, and relentless. As the moon climbed high, fog rolled in from the valleys, curling around the wheels, draping the wagon in a damp, clammy shroud. Jed strained his eyes through the gray veil. The trail ahead was little more than a suggestion, a line of compacted earth fading into the swirling mist. Then he heard it, a soft, metallic clang, subtle at first, almost lost beneath the creaking wood and whinnying horses. Jed froze. Every instinct screamed that the sound was not the wagon, not the horses, not any natural thing. The clang repeated, irregular, deliberate, coming from somewhere behind the cart. His pulse quickened. He dared not turn, fearing what he might see, or what might see him. The air felt heavier, as though the night itself were pressing down, thick and suffocating. The axe. It had returned. Jed had been careful, yet somehow it had slipped from the ashes, returned to him in some hidden, malignant form. Not physical, not entirely, but present, palpable, and aware. A faint pulse seemed to radiate from the mist, a rhythm that matched the beat of his own terrified heart. He spat into his hand, murmuring the old incantations his grandmother had whispered so many years ago. Blood on wood, blood on stone, blood to mark the boundaries of power. He felt a slight shiver through the reins, as if the spell touched something just beyond sight. The air thickened, a scent of iron and wet earth creeping into his nostrils. Unmistakable, unmistakably the cargo. A sudden sound drew his attention, a movement among the trees, just beyond the fog. Not a figure exactly, but a shadow that slithered, stretching in ways that seemed impossible. Jed tightened his grip on the reins, urging the horses forward. The shadow mirrored him, keeping pace, never tiring, every inch of ground marked with the deliberate weight of its presence. He remembered the warning he had given the innkeeper, never to touch it with water, never to treat it carelessly. And yet, the thought struck him with chilling clarity. The axe was clever. It knew. It waited, observing, learning, adapting. Its hunger was patient, but intelligent. Jed's stomach nodded. He was no longer the master of his journey. He was the observed, the prey. The trail wound into a narrow gorge, cliffs rising on either side, the fog clinging to the stone like living tissue. Jed forced the horses into a steady trot, each step echoing against the canyon walls. Then came the unmistakable sound, a metallic scratch against stone, followed by a wet, rasping hiss. The sound circled the wagon, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind. Impossible to locate, impossible to predict. Jed's breath came in ragged bursts. He whispered fervent prayers, calling upon old spirits, invoking the guardians of the forests, pleading for guidance. For a moment, he thought he heard an answer, a low, mournful whistle of wind that seemed to align with his heartbeat. But the shadow did not waver. It was patient, moving with intent. A predator that did not rush. Ahead, a fork in the trail loomed. Jed hesitated, weighing his options. One path led to the river crossing, where the waters ran dark and swift under the moonlight. The other wound into a dense thicket, the trees pressing close, roots clawing at the wheels. He chose the river, hoping the sound of rushing water might mask the presence trailing him. As he approached the crossing, the wagon jolted violently. Something invisible yet powerful struck the cart from behind. Jed stumbled, nearly thrown from the driver's seat. Hoofbeats scattered in panic, and he hissed a sharp command, regaining control. But the sensation remained. A weight, pressing, following, insistent. The metallic clang returned, louder now, interspersed with faint whispers carried on the wind. Jed, Jed, the meal awaits. The cargo hungers. The voice slithered into his mind, insidious, gnawing at his resolve. He shook his head, trying to dispel the words, but the whispers persisted, layering over the sound of rushing water, over the thump of hooves, over his own ragged breathing. He reached the edge of the river. The water ran swift, dark, reflecting the pale moonlight in fragmented ripples. Jed drove the horses carefully through the shallow section, each wheel grating against slick stones. The axe, the cargo, was with him, though unseen. Its presence pressed against the air, pulsing with malevolence, and Jed felt the familiar tug at his chest, the gnawing unease that he had learned to dread. Halfway across, a sudden splash echoed to his right. The horses shied violently, and Jed fought to maintain control. The water rippled unnaturally, black and oily, and for a heartbeat, he thought he saw the axe, floating, suspended, vibrating with energy that seemed to warp the air around it. Then, as if in acknowledgement of his defiance, the river returned to calm, and the whispering resumed, soft but certain. Jed, do not flee. The cargo knows. He made it across, drenched, heart pounding, hands raw, but alive. Yet the realization struck him with grim clarity. The axe would not be burned. It would not be destroyed. It would follow, patient, intelligent, waiting for the moment of weakness. The road ahead, every shadow, every gust of wind, every flicker of lantern light, everything was now marked by the presence of the cargo. As he rode on, the moonlight faded. Behind thickening clouds, the fog returned, thicker, clinging to the horse's flanks, to the wagon, to Jed's skin like icy fingers. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of twig, every faint metallic ping of unseen contact made him flinch. He knew he was not alone. The cargo had returned. And this time, it was not merely haunting, it was active, moving, patient, unstoppable. Hours passed. The trail wound upward, steepening, rocks and roots threatening to tip the wagon. Jed's mind raced. He tried reasoning. The axe was tied to its old incantation, bound by the blood he had left. But the spell was weakened, incomplete. The bucket of water at the inn had undone part of the work, liberated the malevolence in a form he could not fully see, could not fully fight. The mist shifted again, forming shapes, glimpses of a figure with an axe's gleam, yet amorphous, sometimes behind, sometimes beside, impossible to pin down. The whispers intensified, now more coherent, threading into the very marrow of his bones. Jed, tonight, the cargo claims its due. He urged the horses faster, heart hammering against ribs, mind teetering on the edge of panic. The fog thickened, swallowing the path, obscuring even the faint glow of his lantern. He could hear the soft, wet rasp of claws or metal against stone, circling, pacing, patient, and in that sound he understood. The cargo was not bound to him physically. It was bound to his awareness, his fear, his very existence. It could move as the shadows moved, ride the wind, follow the road itself. By the time he reached a small clearing, a faint glimmer of firelight from a distant cabin caught his eye. He considered the warmth, the hope of company, and the danger. The cargo could be anywhere, in anything. A shadow behind the smoke, a glint of metal in the moonlight. He could not trust the world anymore. He made a choice. Keep moving, keep vigilant, never resting, never trusting. And as Jed turned the wagon back onto the trail, the metallic rasping followed, faint but certain. The whispers, now almost teasing, threaded into his consciousness. Jed, the cargo moves. Always. Always. He gripped the reins tighter, jaw clenched, eyes forward, but he knew the truth. The curse would never let him go. The axe, the cargo, the dark will tie to the blood, the fire, and the folly of men. It would continue to move, patient, persistent. A reminder that some objects are never truly left behind, never truly destroyed. Jed rode on, through fog and night, through hills and hollows, carrying the knowledge that the cargo's path was endless, and he, the unwilling coachman, would forever be tied to its malevolent will. Jedediah Crawford had never feared the night as he did now. The once familiar trails of the Appalachians had transformed into a maze of shadow and menace. Each turn of the wagon wheels through the uneven terrain brought a new dread, each snapping twig a whisper of anticipation. The cursed axe, the cargo, was no longer just a latent threat. It was active, probing, taunting, testing his nerves with every heartbeat. The fog hung thick between the trees, curling around the wheels, seeping into the wagon bed. Jed gripped the reins tightly, knuckles white, feeling the pulse of fear vibrate through his forearms. The horses sensed the tension too, ears flicking, hooves hesitant on roots and rocks, tossing their heads at shadows that Jed could not see but could almost feel. He remembered the last whisper. Jed, the cargo moves. Always. Now the movement was more deliberate, more tangible. Metallic scrape against wood, a soft ping, as though something heavy had shifted in the wagon's crate. Jed leaned forward, trying to peer into the fog, lanterns swinging, casting narrow arcs of light. But the shadows seemed to bend away from the glow, avoiding the eye, dancing just beyond reach. The road became slick with mud from a recent rain, red-brown streaks that seemed almost alive in the lantern light. Every wheel turned squelched through the soaked earth. And then it happened. A sudden violent jolt as the wagon lurched to one side. Jed cursed, struggling to maintain control, but it was no natural obstacle. Something had struck the wheels, or the axles. A metallic clang resounded, reverberating through the bed of the wagon. Jed's stomach turned. It's the cargo, he whispered to himself. It's testing me. He reached down for the axe. His hands shook uncontrollably as he pulled it from the crate. The carvings glowed faintly in the lantern light, pulsing with a sinister rhythm, as if alive, as if aware of his fear. The metal felt impossibly heavy, vibrating under his grip, responding to his heartbeats. Jed's breath came in short, ragged gasps, the fog curling into his lungs like icy fingers. A sudden noise from the trees to the left, dry leaves crunching under deliberate pressure, made the horses rear. Jed's heart leapt into his throat. He swung the lantern toward the sound. A shadow detached itself from the trees, humanoid in shape, but unnervingly distorted. It seemed to waver, phasing in and out of existence. The faint glint of metal in its hand, or was it the axe itself, somehow reflected the lantern light. Jed knew there would be no escape. He had tried to outrun it, to reason with it, but the cargo did not heed such things. It was hunger and will, bound to him through the blood, the failed fire, and the folly that had released it into the night. He tried to steady his voice. I know what you are. You're bound to me, and I will not let you take another. The shadow halted, tilting its head, and in the unnatural silence that followed, Jed felt the full weight of its gaze, sharp, insistent, and patient. Suddenly, a sharp, wet scrape sounded from the wagon bed. Jed spun, lantern held high. There, the axe had moved. It was no longer lying idle. It hovered slightly above the wood, spinning lazily in the air, as if testing his courage. Jed froze. The carvings flared, an eerie red light dancing across his features. He felt the pull in his chest, the invisible tether tightening. The first swing of the axe came, not physical, but psychological. Jed imagined the blade cutting through his shoulder. A cold, stabbing pain shot through his body, and he stumbled, dropping the reins. The horses whinnied, skidding to the side. The vision faded as quickly as it came, leaving only the echo of a metallic ping. Jed realized, with a sinking heart, that the cargo had learned to manifest fear, to twist the mind, to strike before even reaching physical form. He clenched the axe, muttering old incantations, murmured prayers to the spirits of the forest and the ancestors of his bloodline. The carvings flared again, but now, the pulsing rhythm seemed to slow, deliberate, like a heartbeat measuring his resolve. The shadow moved closer, keeping pace with the wagon, sliding between the trees in ways that defied logic, passing in and out of the fog, always observing, always patient. The trail steepened, winding upward into a narrow canyon, the earth soft and slick under the wagon wheels. The sound of dripping water echoed off the cliff walls, merging with a new sound, a faint, clanging, subtle yet unnerving, echoing off the rocks. The axe was not just present. It was active, moving, orchestrating the night around him. Jed's teeth clenched as he drove the horses faster, urging them through the canyon, aware that each heartbeat brought him closer to confrontation. Then it struck. Not a shadow this time, but the wagon itself. A jolt, sudden and violent, threw Jed forward. The horses reared, panic overtaking them. He slammed his foot into the side of the wheel, forcing them back onto the path. The axe fell from his hands, spinning across the wagon bed, and when it hit the floor, a blood-like mist hissed from its carvings. Jed staggered back, eyes wide. The shadow coalesced around the axe, forming a grotesque shape. A figure, vaguely humanoid, with the glowing carvings of the axe etched across its limbs. It reached, talon-like fingers grasping at Jed. He swung a lantern, striking it, but the figure flickered, barely registering the contact. The axe hummed, vibrating with an unholy resonance, as though it were laughing. Jed's mind raced. He needed a plan. The blood on his hands, the ritual incantations, the old charms all could bind it, if done correctly. He grabbed a dagger from his belt, carving a symbol of protection onto the wagon floor. The shadow hesitated, a momentary flicker of awareness, as Jed recited the words his grandmother had taught him. Phrases meant to separate the living from the cursed, to tether the spirit back to its origin. The axe shuddered violently, spinning faster, releasing a metallic screech that pierced the night. The shadow shrieked, a sound of rage and frustration, then surged forward. Jed braced himself, feeling the pull, the psychic weight of the malevolence bearing down. With a desperate yell, he flung the dagger onto the spinning axe. The carvings flared a blinding red, the fog convulsed, and for a heartbeat, silence reigned. Jed collapsed against the wagon, gasping. The horses, sensing the shift, calmed, their ears flicking toward the trees. The fog thinned slightly, revealing the trail ahead, but the unease remained. The cargo was restrained, bound temporarily by the combination of blood, incantation, and the dagger's placement, but he knew it would not remain subdued forever. The shadow receded, slipping back into the fog, patient, biding its time. Jed climbed back into the driver's seat, hands trembling. He gripped the reins and the axe cautiously, aware now of the subtle intelligence behind its malevolence. The trail ahead was long, dark, and uncertain. The cargo had made its move, and he had survived, but only just. The night had shown him that this was not a simple curse to evade. It was an active, sentient threat, following him, shaping the landscape, turning the very woods into an extension of its will. He urged the horses forward, lantern swinging, sweat and blood streaking his face. The whispering returned, faint but certain. "Jed, you cannot escape. The cargo remembers." And in that instant, Jed understood the full scope of his ordeal. The trail ahead was soaked with blood, not only that of the past victims who had crossed paths with the cursed axe, but of his own fear, his own vitality, marking him as part of its ledger. The cargo was patient. The cargo was intelligent. The cargo was unstoppable. Every shadow, every gust of wind, every flicker of lantern light was now a potential movement of the axe. Every heartbeat a reminder that he was bound to it, tethered by blood, magic, and folly. And though he had survived the first true confrontation, Jed knew that the next would be even closer, more direct, more lethal. The blood-soaked trail stretched before him, endless and foreboding. And Jed, the reluctant coachman, carried the cargo onward, each mile a test, each hour a measure of his resolve. The cursed axe had shown him its power, and he knew, with icy certainty, that this was only the beginning. The wind was screaming through the canyon that night, a feral, endless sound that clawed through the dark like a living thing. Jedediah Crawford could taste the iron tang of fear in the back of his throat as the horses dragged the wagon uphill, hooves striking sparks from the frozen stone. The air was too still, too watchful. Even the forest, usually whispering with life, had fallen silent, a silence so deep it pressed against the bones. He had bound the cursed axe once, and for a while, the trail had been calm. But the calmness had turned strange, like the surface of a pond before a storm. The horses would flinch at invisible movements. The lantern flame bent sideways without wind. At times, Jed could swear the wagon grew heavier, as if some unseen passenger had climbed aboard. Tonight, the silence broke. A sound distant but unmistakable echoed through the trees. Chop. Pause. Chop. Rhythmic. Deliberate. The unmistakable cadence of an axe striking wood. Jed froze. He turned his head slowly toward the darkness. The sound came from behind, from the back of the wagon. He whispered to the horses, "Easy now." But they trembled, white breath pluming in the air like frightened ghosts. The axe was inside the crate again. He had sealed it, wrapped it in salt cloth, and placed a binding charm on top. But that sound meant the bindings were breaking. He stopped the wagon, stepped down, and lit another lantern. The fog around him was thick as milk, reflecting orange light in uneasy swirls. Each footstep crunched the frost-bitten grass. Jed climbed into the wagon bed, breath sharp, and pulled the tarp aside. The crate was shaking. Tiny red glimmers shone from between the planks, like eyes straining through cracks. The sound stopped. Then, in the stillness, a single word hissed through the fog. "Blood." Jed staggered back, dropping the lantern. The flame rolled along the wagon boards, spreading light across the carvings on the axe handle glyphs that pulsed with a dark inner glow. The weapon was upright now, handle first, as though planted into the wood by unseen hands. It vibrated softly, a resonant hum that throbbed through Jed's chest. He reached for it. "No more running," he muttered. "Let's finish this." As his fingers brushed the haft, a violent shock coursed up his arm. Images flashed through his head, a clearing at dusk, a circle of men around a fire. The same axe raised high as a sacrifice was made. Screaming faces, blood boiling on hot stone. A ritual long forgotten, replaying itself through him. Jed ripped his hand away, gasping, staring as the axe lifted on its own, twisting in midair, head down now, pointing straight at him. The wind surged, but not from nature. It spun from the axe itself, a vortex of ash and whispers that rose like a storm. Jed stumbled off the wagon, grabbing the rifle slung at his back. The trigger trembled under his finger as he aimed into the swirling fog. "Show yourself," he roared. "You took enough men before me. You'll take no more." A shape began to form from the dust, and smoke human, but not quite. Its head hung sideways, neck twisted. Its arms were too long, bones bending wrong. The axe floated in its chest, embedded like a heart. The carvings pulsed in time with the shadow's breath. It spoke not with a voice, but with a chorus of echoes. Jedediah Crawford, you fed the soil with your fear. Now, the soil feeds us. Jed fired. Once. Twice. The bullets tore through smoke, useless. The figure didn't even flinch. Instead, it took a step forward, each footfall echoing like a hammer against coffin wood. The axe began to spin faster, faster, until its hum became a shriek that set Jed's teeth on edge. He dropped the rifle and reached for the dagger he had blessed the night before. He carved a circle in the dirt around himself, muttering the same chant his grandmother had taught him, an Appalachian charm to trap a restless spirit. But the ground cracked. The fog turned crimson. The circle broke. The axe launched itself forward. Jed ducked, barely avoiding the blade as it sliced through the air and buried itself in a tree behind him with a scream that wasn't metal at all, it was alive. Sap boiled from the wound, hissing like blood. Jed turned, grabbing the axe by its handle. "You belong to the ground," he shouted, slamming it down into the dirt. The carvings flashed violently. The fog exploded outward. The figure shrieked, and for the first time, it faltered. Jed saw the truth in its face, a reflection of himself. Eyes hollow, skin gray. The cursed chieftain whose weapon this once was had merged with every soul who'd touched it, carrying their essence within the steel. Jed wasn't just fighting a ghost, he was fighting a lineage of violence. He staggered, vision swimming. "I'll end it," he growled through clenched teeth. "Even if I burn for it." In. He dragged the axe toward the wagon, sloshed lantern oil across the boards, and struck a match. The flames roared up instantly, casting hellish light across the canyon walls. The figure screamed again, the same sound echoing from every direction at once, 1,000 voices of men and women who had carried the cursed cargo before. Jed swung the axe high and hurled it into the burning wagon. Back to the ash. The flames consumed it. For a moment, the air grew still. The fog withdrew, sucked inward toward the blaze, collapsing in on itself. Jed fell to his knees, coughing, eyes burning. He thought he'd done it. He thought the curse was over. Then, from within the fire, something laughed. Low, guttural, familiar. Jed turned. The flames shaped themselves into the form of the chieftain towering, eyes burning white. Its mouth moved, and the words rattled through the canyon like thunder. "You carried me, Jedediah. You gave me the road. You gave me names. You gave me blood." Jed crawled backward, trembling as the figure stepped from the burning wreck, unscathed. The axe, half melted, reformed in its hand, dripping with molten iron. "Then take what's left," Jed hissed, ripping his hand open with his knife. He smeared his blood across the ground, forming one last sigil. "Take me, and leave the rest." The chieftain paused. For a second, a fleeting heartbeat, it seemed to hesitate. The axe trembled, its glow dimming as if uncertain. Then slowly it nodded. The voice whispered, softer this time, almost grateful. "So be it." The axe plunged itself into Jed's chest. He didn't scream. He simply exhaled, eyes wide, staring at the firelight, reflecting in the blade as it sank deeper. His heartbeat slowed, then stopped. The fog surged once more, wrapping him, lifting him. When it cleared, Jedediah Crawford was gone. Only the wagon's ashes remained, and the axe, resting upright in the dirt, gleaming as though freshly forged. For a moment, all was quiet. The wind died. The forest listened. Then, far off, down the trail, the faint sound of hooves echoed steady, patient, returning toward the next town. And in the distance, someone hummed an old Appalachian tune. The cargo moves again. Morning came slow to the valley, spilling over the ridges like honeyed light through broken glass. The smoke still rose from what remained of Jedediah Crawford's wagon, a blackened skeleton of wood and ash among the frost-bitten pines. The smell of it carried down the trail, bitter and strange, laced with something metallic. By midday, a group of riders from the nearby township of Harrow's Hollow found what was left. "Looks like a fire started in the night," one of them muttered, nudging a charred wheel with his boot. "Ain't a soul left to tell what happened." "Yeah," another dismounted, rubbing his beard thoughtfully. That old fool Jed. He's been driving that route 30 years. Never seen a man more careful. Ain't like him to leave the road burning behind. Maybe bandits, someone else offered. Or worse, they found no body. Only the ashes, the blackened remains of a harness, a burned-out lantern, and one item untouched by flame. A single axe, buried half deep in the earth beside the trail. Its surface gleamed as though newly polished. "Now that's peculiar," said the bearded man, crouching. "Shiny as sin. You reckon it's worth something?" He reached down to pick it up. "Leave it," another warned. "Feels wrong. Look at the carvings." But greed is a stubborn whisper, and curiosity, an older one. The man lifted the axe, weighing it in his palm. Cold, heavier than it looked. The metal was smooth. The handle dark wood carved with faint spiraling runes. For a moment, he swore he could feel a pulse beneath his skin, faint, steady, like a heartbeat. He dropped it quickly. The others laughed. "Scared of a tool?" one jeered. "Let it be," said the man with the beard. "We'll take it back to Harrow's. Sell it maybe, or hang it up in the tavern." They left with the axe lashed behind a saddle, unaware of the faint shimmer that rippled across its blade as they rode. The road behind them whispered softly, carrying with it the echo of hooves 2 sets instead of 1. By evening, the tavern at Harrow's Hollow was crowded and loud. The travelers from the highlands brought news, and news brought whiskey. The air buzzed with talk of Jed Crawford, his wagon gone, and the strange fire in the valley. The barkeep, a woman named Martha, wiped down the counter and frowned. Jed never missed a stop, she said, even when the snow was bad. "Maybe he met the devil himself," someone laughed, raising a glass. "Maybe he was the devil," another replied. They all laughed harder, but the sound faltered when the bearded man brought in his trophy, the axe, setting it on the bar. Its blade caught the lamplight in a way that drew every eye. "Found this near what's left of Jed's rig," he said proudly. "Thing's a beauty, ain't it? No rust, no scorch. Reckon it's iron from the old country." Martha frowned. "You sure it ain't stolen goods?" "Jed didn't steal, ma'am. He's dead. This here's fair salvage." The room quieted. Someone spat into the sawdust. "Ain't right to take from the dead, but they left it there anyway." The axe stayed on the bar that night, catching every flicker of firelight as if watching. When Martha closed up, she swore she heard something shift behind her. "Just the wind," she told herself. "Just the wind and whiskey." She turned the lamps down, but one flame refused to die, the one nearest the axe. It burned higher instead, twisting, its smoke curling in the shape of a hand. By dawn, the tavern door was found hanging open, swinging slow in the breeze. The barroom was cold. The fire had long gone out. The axe was gone too. They found Martha 3 days later, a mile upriver, eyes wide open, hands clasped around something invisible. The coroner said it looked like she'd been holding an axe handle that wasn't there. After that, folks in Harrow's Hollow stopped speaking Jedediah's name. They called him the coachman instead, like he'd become part of some old ghost story. And in time, he did. Children whispered that if you rode alone on the back roads at night, you'd hear hooves behind you, steady, deliberate, never catching up, never falling behind. Some said if you turned around, you'd see the coachman himself, face pale, eyes hollow, his cargo sitting beside him, a gleaming axe, waiting for another hand to hold it. Others said it wasn't Jed at all anymore, that whatever spirit had lived inside the weapon now wore his shape, walking the roads it once traveled. Some claimed to have seen him near the burned valley, standing at dawn by the river's bend, always alone, always humming. Winter bled into spring, and spring into dust. Years passed, but the stories didn't fade. The people of Harrow's Hollow changed, but the land didn't. The woods still whispered. The trails still held the memory of hooves. One evening, a stranger rode into town, a preacher, lean and worn, the kind who carried both a Bible and a revolver. He'd heard tales of the cursed road and came seeking proof. At the tavern, the old men told him what they knew, in bits and half-truths, always with their voices low. When they spoke of the axe, their eyes darted toward the hills. "You think it's still out there?" the preacher asked. One man nodded slowly. "Ain't just out there, son. It's everywhere the road goes. The cargo don't stay still." That night, under a moon sharp as a blade, the preacher rode alone down the same road Jed had taken years before. His lantern swung from the saddle, throwing patches of gold on the dark ground. Somewhere ahead, a faint sound echoed metal scraping wood. The horse shied. The preacher steadied it, squinting into the mist. There, lying across the trail, was an axe. Its handle was black, its edge silver bright. It looked newly made. He dismounted, approached carefully, muttering a prayer. The air around it felt heavy, pressing against his chest. He knelt, touching 2 fingers to the dirt beside it, and found blood, fresh, though no wound was near. He whispered, "Lord, guide me," and reached out. When his hand touched the axe, the world went silent. Every sound, wind, crickets, the creak of the saddle vanished. The night held its breath. Then, a whisper filled the void. "Carry me." The preacher yanked his hand away. The voice came again, louder. "Carry me, or the road will take you." The lantern flickered, and in its dying glow he saw something standing at the edge of the trees, a man in a driver's coat, brim low, eyes pale as moonlight. "The coachman," he smiled, or something like it. Then he raised a hand, pointing toward the axe. The preacher stepped back. The world tilted. The air thickened. He could feel the road itself pulsing under his boots, alive, hungry, and beneath it, a rhythm, the same heartbeat that had haunted Jed years before. The axe began to tremble. Slowly, impossibly, it lifted off the ground, hovering before him. The voice whispered once more, "You've come far, preacher. Far enough to know the cargo never ends." The preacher ran. He didn't look back. He rode until dawn, his horse frothing and wild. When he reached the next town, he could still hear it. The chop of steel on wood, faint but relentless, following him like an echo that wouldn't die. Decades later, the legend of the coachman's cargo became just that, a story, a fireside warning for travelers. "Don't touch what ain't yours," the elders would say. "And if you find an axe on the road, leave it be. It ain't lost, it's waiting." But on stormy nights, when thunder rolls down the hills, and the wind takes on that hollow human tone, some swear they can still see a wagon moving through the mist. No horses, no driver, just the rhythmic creak of old wheels and the faint glimmer of steel beneath the tarp. And if you listen close enough that your breath catches and your heartbeat stumbles, you might hear a voice riding the wind, soft as a prayer, cruel as hunger. "Jed, is that you?" The road never answers. It only hums, because the cargo always moves on. The sentinel of the swamp. I never thought much about where the smoke went or what it carried with it. You burn wood long enough, and you start to believe that fire doesn't just consume, it remembers. Every crackle, every hiss in the coal pit. Sometimes it sounds like a name you've forgotten, or a prayer you never meant to say out loud. My name's Elias Crane. 43 years of hauling timber, stacking charcoal, and breathing black dust, Folkestone Street. Landry Parish call men like me pit burners, the last kind of labor nobody envies, not even the grave diggers. We build the pyres, we cover them with earth, and we watch them smolder for days. The smoke crawls into your skin until your sweat runs gray. But it's honest work. At least that's what I used to tell myself. The last job I ever took came on a Thursday, in late August, when the air felt heavy enough to drown in. I was sitting at the dockside tavern near the bayou, half a pint in, when a man named DuPont walked in. Tall, thin, and dressed too well for this side of Louisiana. His shoes had never seen mud, and his cuffs were cleaner than any man's soul around here. He said he needed a charcoal man for a private kiln operation out by Widow's Bay, about 2 miles east of Belchasse. The pay was generous, too generous. Enough silver to keep me fed all winter and maybe even replace the roof that had been leaking since April. I asked him what made the job worth that much. He just smiled, said the wood out there was dense, burned slow and clean. Then he leaned close, and in a whisper that smelled like wet iron told me, "You'll find a large oak near the center of the site. Do not let it go cold. Whatever happens, keep that fire alive." He slid a small pouch across the table. Inside were 5 coins and a silver matchbox engraved with a sigil. I didn't recognize a kind of tree with too many roots, curling inward like a noose. That should have been my first warning. But poverty makes a man blind. I took the job. That night, I loaded my mule cart with tools, iron rake, tongs, a barrel of tar oil, and set out for Widow's Bay. The road narrowed into a dirt path before long, lined with cypress trees that leaned over me like crooked judges. The smell of stagnant water hung thick in the air, and the insects sang their endless dirge. By the time I reached the clearing, the moon was swollen and pale, hanging low over the swamp. There was already a pit dug wide enough to bury a carriage. Around it were piles of logs, and at the edge, half sunk in the muck, stood that oak DuPont had spoken of. It was unlike any tree I'd ever seen. The bark was black, as if it had already been burned once, but the trunk pulsed faintly, almost breathing. Its roots coiled over the ground like serpents, and from the hollows in its bark, I could swear something was watching me. I unloaded my gear and started stacking wood in the pit. The night dragged on, thick and still. Each strike of the axe echoed like a heartbeat. When I lit the first pile, the smoke rose in thick ribbons, crawling toward the oak. The firelight caught its bark, and for a moment, I thought I saw faces in it, dozens of faces, stretched and silent. That's when the first whisper came. Not from behind me, not from the trees, from the fire itself. "Feed it," it said. Just one word, clear as daylight. I froze, hands trembling around the tongs. I told myself it was the wind, or my tired mind playing tricks. But the voice came again, soft and low. "Don't let it die." I poured another shovel of charcoal onto the pit. The flames hissed, then grew higher, twisting blue at the edges. There was something intoxicating about that moment, the way the smoke shimmered, the way the air seemed to hum with invisible breath. I could feel it crawling under my skin, seeping into my lungs like I was breathing something alive. By dawn, the kiln was roaring steady, the pit glowing like the mouth of hell. My eyes burned, my arms ached, but I couldn't stop feeding it. The more wood I gave, the hungrier it seemed to grow. And through the haze of heat and ash, I saw it again, a figure tall, draped in shadow, standing beside the oak. No face, no sound, just a suggestion of movement, like smoke pretending to be a man. When I blinked, it was gone. But the ground beneath the tree seemed to shift, as if something large and slow was turning beneath the soil. That's when I remembered DuPont's words. Don't let it go cold. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. The fire burned without pause, and the whispers kept returning, sometimes calling my name, sometimes laughing in voices that weren't mine. The swamp itself seemed to breathe in rhythm with the flames. By the second morning, I'd started to hear footsteps, circling the pit. Heavy, deliberate, dragging through the mud. When I turned, there was nothing but smoke and reeds swaying in the wind. But I knew better. Whatever watched me from beneath that tree, it wasn't gone. It was waiting for the fire to falter. So I fed it, again and again, until my hands blistered, until the sweat on my skin turned black from soot. And all the while I couldn't stop thinking about what DuPont had really bought me for. Not as a worker, as a witness. I didn't leave the pit for 2 days, not out of diligence, out of fear. You see, once you've heard something breathe in the fire, you start to wonder which one of you is really alive. On the morning of the second day, the swamp looked different. The mist didn't rise from the water anymore, it came from the pit, thick and orange, like the air itself was smoldering. The birds had gone silent. Even the frogs, those damn swamp choirs, were nowhere to be heard. I ate cold beans from a can, sitting beside the kiln, my boots sinking slowly into mud that pulsed with heat. The fire had taken on a rhythm now, exhaling in intervals, like a giant lung beneath the ground. Each time it inhaled, the embers glowed redder, deeper, pulling in air with a low, hollow moan. That's when I realized the ground wasn't breathing. The oak was. Its roots were alive, writhing beneath the soil, sipping at the heat I fed it. When I leaned close, I could hear its sap boiling, wood creaking like old bones, and beneath that a sound I'll never forget, a wet, gurgling swallow. I don't know how long I stood there. Might have been an hour, might have been a second, but the longer I stared into that fire, the more it looked like something else. Like eyes, thousands of them blinking in the coals, all of them staring up at me. I turned away, tried to steady my breath, and saw him again. The man in black. Or maybe not a man at all. He stood across the pit, barely visible through the smoke. His body seemed wrong, too tall, too thin, as if the swamp mist itself had decided to take form. His face was blank, and where his hands should have been, I saw branches, charred, brittle, but moving. He raised one arm slowly, almost tenderly, and pointed toward the pile of unburnt logs stacked behind me. "Feed," he said. Just that one word. It came not from his mouth, but from everywhere, the air, the fire, even the mud beneath my feet. I felt it inside my chest, vibrating like a second heartbeat. I did as I was told. I threw more logs into the pit one by one. The flames surged higher, licking at the night sky, painting everything in shades of blood and rust. But it wasn't just wood that burned. The smell changed. It stopped smelling like pine or oak. It started smelling like flesh. My hands trembled as I backed away, staring at the smoke. Within it, shapes began to form, limbs twisting, mouths opening in silent screams. I could see faces there, some of them familiar, men I'd worked with, long dead from accidents in the kiln fields. I could even swear I saw my father's face, blackened, teeth gritted, staring at me through the haze. "Feed it, Elias," the voice murmured. "Keep it warm." I dropped my shovel and fell to my knees. I must have blacked out for a while, because when I came to, the fire was low again, just embers pulsing faintly like dying hearts. The silence was unbearable. Then came the hunger. It wasn't mine. It was theirs. The pit, the oak, the thing inside the flame, it wanted more. I could feel it pulling at me, gnawing on the edges of my thoughts. I looked around for more wood, but the pile was gone. All that remained were broken planks, bits of tools, and my supply cart. And for one terrible moment, I thought about burning the cart. Then my eyes drifted to the mule. It was still tethered near the edge of the clearing, eyes rolling white with terror. The ground near its hooves steamed. The smell of sulfur was thick in the air. The thought came again, soft, persuasive. Feed it. I wanted to run. God knows I wanted to. But my legs didn't listen. I found myself untying the mule, leading it toward the pit, whispering apologies it couldn't understand. Its breath came out in frantic bursts, clouds of steam in the glowing dark. When the firelight touched its coat, it screamed. That sound will never leave me. The fire leapt forward like a living thing, curling around the animal, swallowing it whole. I turned away, hands over my ears, tears cutting clean paths through the soot on my face. When I looked back, there was nothing left. No bones, no ash. Just a pit that pulsed brighter than before, and that voice, purring, good. And that night, the dreams began. I saw the swamp as it must have been centuries ago, before the bayou, before the roads. There were people here once, not settlers, older, barefoot men and women in masks made of bark and bone, dancing around that same oak tree. The air was thick with smoke and chanting. They fed the fire offerings of blood and flesh. The tree drank it all. When I woke, my hands were covered in black sap. My shirt was stiff with dried tar. The kiln still burned. But now, the ground around it was changing. Tiny cracks had appeared in the mud, glowing faintly from beneath. The roots of the oak had split wider, and through them, I could see something pulsing red and wet, like the inside of a throat. The swamp itself had become part of the fire. By the third night, The whispers didn't come from outside anymore. They came from inside my skull. Every thought, every breath, carried that single command: feed it. When I tried to leave, my legs carried me only a few yards before they failed. The mud held me, thick and warm, dragging at my boots like hands. I swear I felt fingers beneath the surface clutching, pleading. The air stank of iron and burnt sugar. The fire spoke again. "You've done well, Elias. But you owe us more." I screamed until my throat bled. No one answered, so I went back to the pit. There was nothing left to burn but the tools. My rake, my barrel, the wooden handle of my spade. Each time I tossed one in, the flames roared higher and the ground shivered in pleasure. And through the noise I heard laughter, low, gurgling, endless. That's when I saw the faces again, clearer this time. They weren't in the fire anymore. They were in the wood of the oak. Dozens of them, half-formed, mouths open in silent agony. One of them was DuPont. His eyes rolled in the bark like trapped bubbles of tar. His lips moved soundlessly until the word formed: "Keep it warm." And then his face sank into the trunk, replaced by another mine. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I stumbled backward, tripping into the mud. The roots of the oak had reached me now, curling around my boots, dragging me toward the pit. The fire rose, towering, twisting into the shape of a man, a figure of flame and shadow crowned with burning branches. The sentinel. I felt my mind fracture at the sight of it. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It only watched me, its head tilting slightly, the way a man might regard a dog that's done its duty. Then it raised a hand, and the flames bent toward me. I ran, through the swamp, through the mist, stumbling over roots and bones half sunk in the mud. Behind me, the pit roared like a furnace, lighting up the sky. The air shook with a sound like 1,000 voices crying out in joy. I didn't stop until the fire was a faint glow on the horizon. Even then, I could still hear it. The breathing, the hunger. It wasn't done with me. Not yet. They told us the blast furnaces never truly stopped burning, that even when the power went out and the conveyor belts froze, something deep inside the foundry kept eating. We laughed at that once. We called it ghost heat, leftover energy from a century of labor. But after the third night, I stopped laughing. The air inside Sector 7 had grown thick enough to taste metal, soot, and a sweetness like cooked blood. I could feel it coating the back of my throat, as if something was breathing out from the walls. The emergency lights flickered again. Orange glow, then dark, then orange again, pulsing like a dying heartbeat. I was alone on the floor, or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. 3:41 a.m. I'd been sent to check the feeder lines to the main crucible. Management said there'd been an anomaly in thermal readings. That's what they always called it, an anomaly. Never a malfunction, never a fire hazard. Just something they couldn't categorize in a report. The feeder pipes hissed beneath my boots, rattling with a rhythm almost human, like something shifting in its sleep. My flashlight caught streaks of black residue along the walls, streaks shaped like handprints, but elongated, melted into the metal. As I got closer to the crucible chamber, I began hearing it again, that low, groaning hum, deep and steady as if the building itself were trying to breathe. I knew the sound. Every worker did. We called it the Sentinel. It started as an in-joke decades ago. The old workers claimed that when the foundry was first built, a man got trapped inside one of the blast furnaces during a pressure test. The temperature was so high they couldn't recover his remains. The steel had consumed him. The legend said that his body became part of the furnace, that his eyes turned to slag, and his lungs filled with ember. They said he still watched over the place, making sure the fire never went out. The Sentinel. I reached the control console near the crucible hatch and brushed away the layer of soot covering the screen. Static. Then a flicker of thermal data. Internal heat, 1,280 degrees Celsius. Pressure, rising. Organic matter detected. That last line froze me. Organic matter. I stared at it, wondering if the system was glitching again. But the readings pulsed, updated, stabilized. Organic matter. Active. Movement. Detected. Then I heard a dragging sound from the pit. Metal scraping against metal. Slow. Deliberate. The hatch to the crucible opened with a hydraulic groan, heat rushing out like a scream. My visor fogged instantly, and I felt my eyelashes start to crisp. I took one step forward and shone my light inside. Something moved. Not a shadow, not smoke, but mass. Glowing, pulsating mass. It clung to the walls of the furnace like molten flesh, rising and sinking in waves. Faces appeared for half a second in its surface. Faces of men, screaming silently, then melting back into the metal. And at the center of it all, something stood upright. A figure, tall, skeletal, blackened to the color of coal. Its ribcage glowed faintly from within, embers flickering between the bones like a dying forge. It was watching me. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the rail. The sound it made wasn't a roar or a growl, it was breathing. Deep, rhythmic, mechanical. The same sound the foundry made in its sleep. The sentinel wasn't a story. It wasn't a myth. It was the foundry itself. The thing stepped forward, and the floor trembled. Each step left behind molten prints that hissed as they cooled. When it spoke, the words came not from a mouth, but from the vibration in the pipes, the hum of the ceiling fans, the moan of the vents. The fire must be fed. I backed toward the emergency ladder, but the heat intensified, pressing against me like a living wall. The hatch behind me slammed shut, sealing me in. "We built this place," I whispered. "We made you. You fed me," the voice replied. "You still do." The crucible roared back to life. The molten substance surged up the walls, reaching toward me. I saw within it shapes, torsos, limbs, faces twisted in agony, every worker who had ever disappeared. The sentinel raised its arm, and from the glowing ribcage, something tore free a shard of steel, forged into the shape of a blade, still dripping with liquid fire. "You brought fuel," it said. "You stay." I ran. The maintenance tunnels below the foundry were a maze of pipes and steam vents. The sound followed me, a deep, guttural rhythm, echoing through the ducts, like the heartbeat of something vast and ancient. Every corridor looked the same. Every turn led deeper into the red glow, and the walls were breathing. I could see them flex under the pressure metal plates, bending inward, pulsing in unison. Something was moving behind them, pressing its weight against the steel as if trying to crawl out. I reached the secondary furnace chamber, slamming the door behind me. I tried to use the console to override the ventilation, but the controls were dead. The monitors flickered to life by themselves, showing distorted camera feeds, workers moving through the plant. Even though the plant had been shut down for weeks, one feed zoomed in automatically, on me. The screen filled with static. Then an image formed of the sentinel, standing at the far end of the tunnel, watching. Its eyes glowed like two furnaces. There was always hunger, it whispered through the speakers. You only learn to shape it. I smashed the console with a wrench. Sparks flew, but the voice kept speaking now from inside the pipes. They think fire dies when the power goes out. They forget what lives beneath. The temperature gauge rose steadily, 400 degrees Celsius, 600 degrees Celsius, 800 degrees Celsius. The pipes began to glow. Something inside me broke. I turned to run again, but my boot slipped. The floor was coated with molten slag, creeping like living mercury. It reached from my ankles, and when it touched skin, I felt memory. Visions burned through me, hundreds of men and women, sweating in the heat, coughing blood into their masks, praying for the siren that never came. Their bodies falling into the vats, one by one. The foundry remembered them all. It had digested their pain. It had become them. And I was next. I dragged myself toward the exit hatch, the slag still clinging to my legs, burning through the fabric. My hand slipped on the wheel, flesh blistering. I screamed and twisted. The hatch opened, releasing a gust of cold night air. Behind me, the sentinel roared a sound that shook the walls. A furnace's death cry. You will feed the feast. I dove through the hatch. When I woke up, it was dawn. The foundry was silent. No hum, no steam, no breathing walls. The fire had gone out. I crawled across the gravel, half blind from the smoke. The wind carried the smell of rust and something sweet roasted metal, charred memory. When I looked back, I saw the factory towers collapsing inward, as if the whole structure were exhaling. A column of ash rose into the pale sky, spiraling like smoke from a pyre. And in that rising column, for just a second, I saw a shape, a tall, ember-eyed figure watching me leave. It's been 3 weeks since that night. The company denied everything, said the plant had been decommissioned for months, no one authorized to enter. But I know what I saw. I can still hear the breathing in my dreams. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I smell the slag again, and the faint, coppery sweetness of cooked blood. Last night I woke to the sound of the radiator groaning. It pulsed 3 times, like a heartbeat, and in the hiss of escaping steam, I heard a whisper. The feast isn't over. They always say the human mind has a way of erasing trauma, dulling the sharp edges, softening the memories until they fit into something survivable. That's a lie. The mind doesn't erase. It buries. And sometimes, when the air gets heavy enough, when the silence grows too loud, the things you've buried start to dig their way back up. For me, it began with the smell. Burnt iron, hot grease, and something else, the faint sweetness of roasted flesh. It came from nowhere, threading through the vents of my apartment like smoke through a graveyard. I hadn't stepped foot in the foundry since that night, but the foundry had found me. It started small, a hiss from the radiator, the creak of pipes in the walls, but every sound had rhythm, breath. I'd wake up to the hum of machinery, even though I lived 12 miles from the industrial zone. When I closed my eyes, I could see it again, the orange glow, the endless pulsing heat, the silhouette of the sentinel. It never spoke anymore. It just watched. And then, 3 nights ago, I saw the lights again. The skyline over the old district was dead black towers, gutted smokestacks, nothing but ruin. But as I stood by my window, I saw a flicker on the horizon, faint, red, pulsing. Sector 7. I told myself it was impossible. The foundry had collapsed. It was gone, but the glow kept rising. And when the wind shifted, I smelled it again, that same copper-sweet scent. That's when I knew it wasn't over. I drove out there just before midnight. The road to the foundry was cracked, overgrown with weeds, and the metal fence was twisted like it had melted under its own weight. When I stepped inside, the ground was warm. The foundry was alive again, breathing in slow, shuddering motions. Steam rose from the vents like ghostly hands reaching upward. And there at the heart of the ruin, the crucible pit burned once more. Not orange, not red, but white. A color so bright it bled through the air, like light forced through bone. The noise came next. Low, rhythmic, familiar. The hum of the sentinel. Only this time, it wasn't contained. It was everywhere. The entire plant was vibrating with it, the floors trembling, the walls bending, the pipes moaning as if in pain. And beneath that sound was something else. Voices. Hundreds of them. Crying, whispering, begging. The workers who had been swallowed by the foundry. They were awake. I stumbled toward the main floor, the heat peeling at my skin, my breath coming in ragged bursts. The conveyor belts were running empty, but moving as though carrying invisible cargo. The cranes swayed overhead, their hooks dripping molten slag. Then the lights burst on every lamp, every overhead fixture flooding the place in a glare like daylight made of fire. And in the center of it, surrounded by the glow, the sentinel stood. But it had changed. It wasn't just one shape anymore. It was many. Bodies fused together, molten silhouettes of men, women, and things that used to be human. Their faces half-formed, mouths open in soundless screams. They reached from its surface like hands pressing through wax. It was the foundry made flesh. "You came back," it said. The voice didn't echo from the walls this time. It came from inside me. Every bone in my body vibrated with it, every nerve screaming. We never stop burning. The feast continues. I tried to run, but the floor beneath me cracked, and heat exploded upward. Hands of molten metal burst from the ground, skeletal, glowing, dragging themselves out of the floor. The lost workers. Their eyes were coals. Their mouths were furnaces. They moved toward me in jerks and twitches, their limbs groaning like rusted pistons. "Feed it," they whispered. "Feed the fire." I swung my wrench, the same one I'd carried the night I escaped. It connected with one of them, sending sparks across its face. The creature didn't scream, it just split open, revealing molten veins inside, glowing brighter with each movement. It wasn't dying. It was stoking itself. The more damage I did, the hotter it burned. The air thickened, the heat blistering my skin. I ran for the control tower, the only place with access to the coolant systems. If I could shut the valves, maybe I could starve the crucible. I climbed the staircase 3 steps at a time, my boots melting into the metal. The railing burned my palms, but I didn't stop. Below me, the workers crawled, their bodies fusing into one another, forming a wave of molten flesh that surged upward toward the tower. The sentinel followed, step by deliberate step. I reached the control deck. Half the panels were dead, the other half glowing with unreadable data. I slammed the emergency override, forcing open the coolant valves. Water hissed down the pipes, meeting molten metal with an ear-splitting shriek. Steam filled the air, so thick I could barely breathe. For a moment, the sentinel stopped moving. Its body flickered, molten surfaces cracking, light dimming. And then it spoke again. "You think you can unmake fire with water?" The coolant lines burst. Superheated vapor exploded through the room, throwing me backward into the glass. I hit the floor hard, vision spinning. Through the haze, I saw the sentinel step into the tower. Every step made the floor buckle. It reached toward the glass wall overlooking the crucible, and through it I saw the pit changing. Something vast was rising from within. The crucible wasn't a furnace anymore. It was a mouth, circular, teeth made of twisted steel beams, tongue of molten slag. The foundry wasn't just alive, it was hungry. The sentinel raised its hand, and the metal beneath me softened, sagged. I could feel gravity turning against me, pulling me toward the open pit. "You built me from hunger," it said. "Now you will see how hunger builds." The walls began to melt. The tower tilted toward the pit. I crawled to the emergency hatch, tearing my gloves apart in the process. The floor gave way, and I caught the edge with one hand. Below, the crucible mouth roared, white-hot light filling my eyes. I pulled myself up, screaming through clenched teeth, and slammed the hatch open. Cool night air hit my face. I rolled out onto the outer walkway, just as the tower collapsed behind me, plunging into the crucible below. The impact shook the entire foundry. The pit screamed an inhuman industrial roar. Then, silence. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then, the silence shifted. I looked up. The smoke rising from the crucible was turning black, thick, oily, unnatural, and within that, smoke shapes moved. Dozens, hundreds. The faces of the lost workers twisted in the fumes, their eyes glowing faintly. "We fed the fire," they whispered. "Now it feeds the world." The cloud spread, rolling outward from the foundry, carried by the wind. I watched as they drifted toward the city, toward the sleeping streets, the empty factories, the homes. Everywhere the smoke touched, the streetlights flickered. The hunger was spreading. I ran until my lungs burned, until the glow of the foundry was just a red pulse behind me. But even as I escaped, I could feel it in my chest, a faint vibration, syncing with my heartbeat. The sentinel wasn't destroyed. It had moved on. It had inherited me. I've stopped going outside. Every night, the hum returns through the walls, through the floorboards. Sometimes I catch my reflection in the window and see something flicker behind my eyes. A glow, faint, orange. The heat inside me builds with each passing day. I don't dream anymore. I smolder, When I breathe, I swear I can see the air shimmer as if something inside me is burning to get out. I used to believe we controlled the fire, that we forged it, shaped it, made it ours. But I see it now. The fire was only ever borrowing us. We were the fuel all along. The silence, after the blaze, was the kind that presses against your eardrums, thick and low, as if the air itself had been burned hollow. I don't remember how long I stood there, surrounded by what used to be the refinery, its ribs glowing faintly beneath the weight of soot. The machines had melted into each other, veins of molten steel curling like sleeping serpents. The smell was the same as before: iron, smoke, and that faint sweetness of roasted flesh. But now it was softened by the drizzle that began to fall, hissing as it touched the cinders. I breathed it in. I thought it would burn, but it didn't. Everything was quiet except the sound of slow dripping. The ash came down like snow, gray, soft, forgiving. I could almost believe that the refinery was exhaling at last, sighing out centuries of exhaustion. The pipes that once screamed now murmured low tones, and when the wind slid through the holes in the collapsed roof, it sounded almost like the hum of a hymn. I walked among the ruins and felt them breathing beneath my boots, a slow pulse in the ground, as if the earth was digesting what we had fed it. I found what was left of the control tower. The glass had melted, pooled, and cooled into ripples that reflected the orange of dying coals. I could still see my reflection in it, warped, longer, thinner, my eyes the color of rust. My skin shimmered faintly in the half-light, coated with a sheen that wasn't quite dust and wasn't quite sweat. When I exhaled, a thin ribbon of smoke curled from my mouth, not black, but red gold, like the last sigh of a candle. I think I understood then what the sentinel had whispered when the flames reached the ceiling. "It doesn't consume," it said. "It remembers." And I realized that maybe the fire had never wanted to destroy anything. It only wanted to live inside something, to continue its hum. That hum was inside me now, deep in my chest, a second heartbeat that pulsed whenever I closed my eyes. The others, the workers, the engineers, the shift leaders, they were gone, but not in the way you'd expect. Sometimes I see them when I blink too slowly, their silhouettes faint against the ember glow, walking calmly through corridors that no longer exist. Their movements are mechanical, ritualistic. They lift invisible tools, turn ghostly valves, and I swear I can hear them whisper the same work songs we used to sing during long nights. Only now they sound slower, stretched thin, like voices caught in static. I want to join them, and sometimes I think I already have. When I breathe now, I taste metal. The air carries a faint vibration, a hum that resonates with the rhythm of the machines we built, the machines that devoured us. The refinery isn't gone. It's only quieter, deeper, like a sleeping organism digesting its own heart. Every so often, when the night is windless, I can hear the deep groan of its buried furnaces, still turning something, still feeding on something that never went out. I sleep near the edge of the ruins, where the ground is warm and the ash forms soft drifts. The nights stretch endlessly, stitched together by the steady pulse of heat beneath me. I dream of light, not the cruel, cutting light of fire, but a slow breathing glow that moves through veins like blood. In those dreams I see faces molten, radiant, at peace. They don't speak, but their mouths move in rhythm with my breathing, and I wake up with the faint taste of smoke in my throat. Sometimes travelers pass by. They look at the horizon, see the faint shimmer above the blackened ground, and ask if it's safe to walk through. I tell them yes, though I know it isn't. I tell them the refinery sleeps now, that the sentinel is gone, that the hunger is over. They thank me, and as they walk into the ruins, I see the ash rise around them, clinging gently to their clothes like affectionate hands. They never come out again, but I don't worry. The refinery keeps them warm. When the wind blows hard, the pipes buried beneath the soot begin to sing. The sound is deep and hollow, like a whale's call through iron water. I hum along sometimes. It feels right, too. The fire in my chest sways with the rhythm, steady and calm. The sentinel doesn't whisper anymore, but its warmth remains, gentle as breath. I think it lives through me now, or perhaps I live through it. I don't feel lonely, The ash breathes. The ground hums. The air is thick with memory, and I am part of it, a spark suspended in an endless exhalation. The refinery was never just a place. It was a lung, a heart, a womb for the endless cycle of burning and becoming. When dawn comes, the light looks strange through the smoke-filtered amber eternal. I stand among the quiet bones of the refinery and exhale, letting the ember-laced breath drift toward the pale sky. Somewhere far below, the furnaces stir, answering softly. And in that moment, I understand. The fire never left. It only learned to breathe slower, the bride of the wasteland. The desert had its own kind of silence. Not the peaceful kind that brings rest, but a hollow quiet that feels like it's listening. That night, I was the only thing moving across the wasteland, my boots dragging through dust so fine it clung to my tongue. The sun had sunk behind the black ridges, leaving a bruise of red in the sky that bled slowly into darkness. I remember thinking that the wind had teeth dry and sharp, biting at my skin with each gust. I'd been gone from the town of Marrow Creek for nearly a year, maybe more. Time doesn't mean much when every day looks the same. The same sun, the same dirt, the same empty bottles staring back at you like old friends. I left that place because I was tired of seeing faces that remembered me. Faces of women who'd stopped smiling when I walked by. Faces of men who'd stopped shaking my hand. They said I had a cruel mouth and a colder heart, but I wasn't cruel. I just didn't see the point in pretending to love anyone when all I ever wanted was to feel something again. The war had taken most of it out of me. The rest, the desert burned away. That evening, when I saw the outline of Marrow Creek rise from the horizon, it felt less like coming home and more like walking into a memory that had been left out too long in the Sunday. The saloon lights flickered weakly. The church bell was gone, and the well had been dry for years. I tied my horse outside the only building, still breathing a half-collapsed inn that smelled of whiskey and regret, and stepped inside. No one looked up. The piano in the corner was missing 3 keys, and the old man playing it was missing more than that. I drank whatever they poured and didn't ask the price. There was talk about gold found in the ravine to the west, about a preacher who'd hung himself in his own church, about women gone missing near the dried-up lake. I didn't listen much until someone mentioned a name, Lilith. Said she'd come out of nowhere. Said she lived alone beyond the salt flats, where the wind never stopped and the flowers grew in strange colors even in the dead of summer. Said she had the kind of beauty that didn't belong to this world, soft as moonlight, dangerous as a mirage. I laughed, the way men laugh when they're afraid of something they can't name. Someone told me not to go near her place. I told them I'd go wherever I damn well pleased. By the time I left the bar, the sky was the color of old bruises. The wind had changed. It carried the smell of something sweet and wrong, like wilted roses and old graves. I followed it without knowing why. The path west led through broken fences and the bones of cattle half buried in the sand. The stars came out sharp and cold, and the moon was a thin sickle, barely enough light to see by. That's when I saw her. She was standing in the road ahead, holding a wicker basket full of wildflowers, pale, trembling things that glowed faintly in the dark. Her dress shimmered green, like water seen through glass, and her hair was the color of dry wheat. She smiled as if she'd been waiting for me all her life. "You're far from town," I said, my voice rough from whiskey and dust. She tilted her head. "So are you." Her voice didn't sound like it belonged to this place. Soft, lilting, touched with something I couldn't place. She said her name was Lilith Gray, and that she lived just beyond the ridge, where there was a house with white walls and a garden that never died. I told her my name was Silas, though she said she already knew. She said my name the way a priest says a prayer for the damned, gently, as if it didn't matter anymore. I should have turned back then. Every man knows when something feels too easy, too perfect. But I followed her through the dark, through a stretch of dead land, where the earth cracked beneath our boots and the sky seemed to lean closer, listening. Her house was real, a 2-story relic, with whitewashed walls and a porch half swallowed by creeping vines. Candles flickered behind the windows. The air smelled of lavender and rain, though there hadn't been rain here in months. Inside, everything was clean and old, like it had been waiting a long time. A woman greeted us, tall, thin, with silver hair pinned high on her head and eyes that glimmered the same strange green as her daughter's dress. She smiled at me, but it wasn't a welcoming smile. It was the kind of smile that hides teeth. "You brought a guest," she said to Lilith. "Yes, Mother," Lilith replied. "He was lost." The woman nodded slowly. "Then he may stay the night, but the wasteland keeps what it is owed." I didn't know what she meant. I was too hungry to care. The table was set with roasted meat, bread, and wine so dark it looked black. I ate until I couldn't breathe, while the two of them watched. The food was cold, but I didn't mind. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at me like I mattered. After dinner, the old woman took my hand. Her fingers were dry as parchment. "You should rest, Mr. Silas," she said. "Lilith will show you to your room." I followed Lilith up the staircase, the candlelight tracing the curve of her neck, the shimmer of her hair. The hall smelled faintly of dust and roses. When she turned to face me at the door, I saw something in her eyes. Not affection, not pity, but something vast and hungry, something old. She asked if I believed in vows. I told her I didn't believe in much of anything anymore. She smiled and said that was about to change. The room she led me into was warm, though no fire burned in the hearth. The bed was covered in white linen, untouched, waiting. She set the candle by the window and turned to me. The wind outside had gone still. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Only until dawn." I don't remember who kissed whom first. I just remember the taste of her lips, sweet like something that had been buried too long. The rest of the night was a blur of heat and whispering shadows, the kind of passion that feels borrowed, dangerous, almost sacred. When I woke, the air was colder. The candle had burned down to a stub. Lilith was gone. I called her name, but only the wind answered, soft and hollow. I stumbled out of the room, my legs heavy, my head ringing. The house was silent. Too silent. Downstairs, the chairs were empty. The table was bare. The smell of lavender had turned sour, metallic. I stepped outside, blinking in the gray light of dawn. The garden was gone. The house was gone. I was standing in the middle of a graveyard. My throat went dry. My hands were trembling. There was no path back to town, only cracked earth and stone markers jutting like broken teeth from the ground. And in the middle of them, where the house had been, stood a single gravestone, white, smooth, freshly cleaned. The name carved on it read, Lilith Gray, 1,850. 1,875. I dropped to my knees. The dust rose around me like a veil. I didn't scream. I didn't move. Somewhere behind me, a voice, soft, familiar, whispered my name. And when I turned, she was standing there again. The green dress fluttering like mist in the wind, her eyes empty, her smile tender and cold. "Till death do us part," she said. And I finally understood she hadn't brought me home. She'd brought me here. The road had long since stopped pretending to be a road. It wound like a scar through the desert, its edges breaking into veins of pale sand and bone-gray dust. And somewhere along that forgotten path stood a house too white for this world, too whole for a place that had long given up on life. Thomas first saw it near dusk, when the sun was no longer a circle but a wound on the horizon, bleeding orange into the dead air. He'd been walking for what felt like days, though time had lost its name out here. His shoes were split at the seams, his throat raw from wind and silence. And then, without warning, the house appeared a structure as clean and precise as if drawn by a trembling hand against the endless decay. It wasn't large, but it was perfect. 4 walls of flawless white, no cracks, no stains, no dust. The roof was tiled with pale slates that caught what little light remained, and the windows gleamed as if someone had polished them only moments before. It didn't belong to this wasteland, it belonged to memory, to dream, or perhaps to something that had replaced both. He hesitated before approaching. Every instinct in his body whispered that he should not. Yet the air carried the faintest hum, like a lullaby hummed through water. And in that moment, the exhaustion of days folded over him like a blanket. His mind drifted toward comfort, toward the promise of shelter, and before he knew it, he was standing before the door. It opened without touch. The interior smelled of lilies and old linen, a scent so clean it bordered on sterile. The floor was made of polished white marble that reflected the dying sunlight in thin, feverish lines. No furniture, no dust, no sign of decay, only emptiness, arranged with care. The walls seemed to breathe faintly, expanding and contracting in rhythm with his heartbeat, though when he blinked, they were still again. "Hello?" Thomas called, his voice too small in that vast silence. The house didn't answer, but something within it shifted a whisper, a soft sigh that came not from air but from memory itself. He stepped further inside. The door closed behind him with a sound that was almost kind, almost maternal. Room by room, the house revealed itself. Each chamber was brighter than the last, and in each one, Thomas found an object that seemed to belong to him. A pair of worn boots near a stairwell, a photograph lying on a marble shelf, a journal bound in soft, familiar leather. The pages were blank, but when he held it long enough, faint words began to rise like bruises. "You have come back." He closed the book and put it down carefully, as if afraid to disturb whatever was writing those words from the other side. In the next room, the walls gleamed brighter, wider, until the light seemed to thicken in the air. There was a mirror here, framed in ivory. For a moment, he thought it was fogged, but as he drew closer, he realized that the glass itself was trembling, as if the image beneath it were alive. He looked into it and saw not himself, but the reflection of a bride. She stood where he stood, her veil shimmering like frost, her eyes pale as moons. Her dress, though colorless, rippled as if underwater. She raised a hand slowly, fingers long and translucent, and Thomas, unable to stop himself, raised his own. When their fingertips met the glass, the reflection smiled. "Do you remember?" she whispered, her voice slipping through the glass like mist. He stepped back. "Who are you?" But the question sounded absurd the moment it left his mouth, because part of him knew. The scent of lilies, the way her head tilted slightly to the right, it stirred something old and buried. The walls began to hum again. The light thickened until the edges of the room dissolved, and then she was gone. Thomas stumbled backward, and the mirror shattered not with sound, but with silence. The shards fell like feathers scattering light across the marble floor. He looked down and saw that every fragment still reflected her face. Hundreds of versions of her, each one frozen in a different expression. Sorrow, longing, peace. He turned to leave, but the hallway had changed. Where there had been an open doorway, there was now a corridor of white stretching endlessly forward. The ceiling arched high, narrowing with distance, until it vanished into light. He could feel warmth coming from the end of it, the same kind of warmth that used to mean home. He walked. The air was thick, with a sound that might have been a heartbeat, or the slow, deliberate rhythm of footsteps that weren't his. The walls grew brighter, whiter, until they no longer looked painted but alive, pulsing faintly, as if blood ran just beneath the surface. Every few steps, he thought he saw movement, a veil flicking around a corner, a shadow of lace trailing across the floor. He whispered her name, though he didn't know it. His lips shaped something like Alara. When he finally reached the end of the corridor, he found a door not white, but wooden, its surface worn and cracked, utterly out of place in the sterile world around it. He placed his hand on it. The handle was cold. When it opened, the scent of earth and dust replaced the lilies. The room beyond was not bright at all. It was dim, lit by candles that seemed to burn without flame, and in the center stood a table draped in cloth the color of bone. Upon it lay a bouquet of dried flowers, wrapped in yellowed lace. Beside the table, there was a figure. She sat with her back to him, her veil cascading down to the floor like a spill of moonlight. Her hands rested neatly on her lap, and when she spoke, her voice was smaller than before, gentler, weary. "You kept the promise," she said. "You came back." Thomas's voice trembled. "I don't remember making one." "Of course you don't." She rose slowly, her dress whispering against the floor. The wasteland takes everything but the vow. She turned, and in that dim glow, her face was both young and ancient, a shifting mask of grief and serenity. Her eyes, those pale, colorless eyes, looked at him as if through layers of forgotten time. "I waited," she said. "Even after the fire, even after the house turned to ash." Thomas swallowed. "There was fire?" She smiled faintly. "You don't remember that either." And then, as if the thought itself commanded it, the walls began to burn not with flame, but with light. The marble shimmered, the air rippled, and the white turned to red. In the flickering glow, Thomas saw visions stitched into the light. The house as it once was, filled with laughter and warmth. The same bride walking down these halls, her hand in his, a wedding ring falling into ash. He fell to his knees as the light surged. Her veil lifted in a wind that wasn't there, revealing a crown of bone-white flowers and a scar that ran across her throat, clean and deliberate. "Do you remember now?" she whispered. "I did. The fire. The promise. The endless vow to return." He reached for her, but his hands passed through like smoke. She leaned close, her words soft as a lullaby. "You can rest now. The house will remember for you." And then she was gone again, and the room was whole once more, the walls white, the air still. Thomas stood alone in the immaculate house, the scent of lilies returning, faint but certain. The door behind him had vanished. The outside world no longer existed. He walked back through the halls, each step lighter, slower. The objects he had found, the boots, the photo, the journal, had disappeared. In their place, new ones had appeared. A veil folded neatly on a shelf, a single ring gleaming in a dish, a pair of footprints side by side in the marble dust. When he reached the entrance, he saw his reflection in the glass again, not as he was, but as he might have been, dressed in white, hand in hand with the bride. Outside, the desert wind sighed softly. The house stood still, and somewhere within its walls 2 heartbeats echoed in perfect rhythm, one fading, one remembering. The dawn did not come that morning. It arrived instead as a slow dilation of light, as if the desert were blinking open a single tired eye. The house, white and silent, had lost its edges again, melting into the sand, dissolving into mirage, and Thomas found himself walking where its walls should have been. There was no boundary anymore between indoors and out, between home and wasteland. The two had blended, like salt into water. The air was pale. The world hummed. He walked barefoot, the ground beneath him cool and fine, as though the desert itself had been powdered into ash. Each step left no trace. The horizon bent slightly, trembling like heat, though the morning was cold. And there, at the farthest distance, stood the altar, a shape that seemed to breathe, the only thing truly solid in a dissolving world. It was built from bones, not the grotesque kind, but the pale, smooth remnants of creatures long forgotten, fused into columns of ivory that reached skyward like fingers praying. White fabric hung between them, shifting without wind. Beneath the arch, something waited, neither statue nor spirit, but a presence that was both patient and expectant. Thomas felt his heartbeat begin to slow, not from fear, but from an inexplicable peace. It was the feeling of stepping into something rehearsed, something promised long ago. And then he heard her voice. "Thomas," she said, the sound almost tender. "You're late." She stood at the altar, her gown trailing like mist, her veil moving with its own breath. Her hands were clasped before her, though one of them was gloved and the other bare. The skin of the bare hand shimmered faintly, as if it remembered fire. He tried to speak, but his throat yielded only air. "You walked away once," she continued. "Do you remember what you said before the flames took it all?" He shook his head, though part of him did know the echo of vows that were never completed, a promise spoken into the smoke of their own destruction. "I said I'd come back," he whispered finally. She smiled. "And you did. The desert remembered for you. It always does." The veil lifted slightly, revealing her face still impossibly serene, her lips pale as chalk, her eyes reflected no light. Yet within them he saw motion, as though an entire landscape was breathing behind her gaze. She stepped closer, the sound of her movement like cloth over glass. "Do you know what this place is?" He looked around. The desert rippled gently, its dunes arranged like pews. Shapes began to form, figures draped in white, faceless, silent, swaying in unison like wheat in a windless field. Their outlines shimmered, never quite solid. "A church?" he said. "A memory," she corrected softly. "A place we built when there was nothing left to build with. A wedding that refused to die." Her hands reached for him, and when her fingers touched his, they were neither warm nor cold, only steady, like marble remembering the shape of life. The moment they met, the faceless witnesses bowed their heads, and the desert itself seemed to exhale. From somewhere unseen, a bell tolled. Not metal, but hollow like the ringing of bone against stone. The ceremony began. The air grew thick with a fine white dust, and in it, whispers took form, vows in forgotten languages, blessings spoken by mouths that hadn't existed in centuries. The bride's voice rose above them all, soft and measured, carrying the gravity of repetition, as though she had spoken these words 1,000 times before and would again 1,000 times more. "With this vow," she said, "we return what the fire took." Thomas felt the ground pulse beneath his feet. He could taste something metallic in the air, like rain before it falls. His own voice moved without his will. "With this vow," he repeated, "we return." The dust swirled faster, forming patterns, circles within circles, symbols of joining and release. The figures around them lifted their heads. Their faces flickered into being, glimpses of eyes, of lips whispering old prayers, of expressions frozen in that strange balance between sorrow and serenity. The bride extended her gloved hand and opened it. Within lay a ring, not gold but white stone, carved in the shape of an unbroken loop. When she slid it onto his finger, it felt weightless, yet every part of him knew it was heavier than memory. The moment it settled, the world tilted. The sand beneath them rippled outward like water. The faceless guests dissolved, the altar shimmered, and the sky began to fold inward upon itself, curling at the edges like burnt paper. And from that collapsing horizon came a wind, a soundless, endless sigh that carried 1,000 voices. It pressed through him, through her, through the ceremony itself, until all that remained were two figures, standing in a world of white. "Do you understand now?" she whispered. He nodded slowly. The words no longer seemed possible. He saw it all now. The house of white walls was not a refuge, but a memory skeleton. The desert was not land, but the afterimage of fire. And she, his bride, was not a ghost, but the persistence of a promise unfulfilled. They were not alive, and they were not dead. They were the space between. He reached for her again. This time, his touch didn't pass through. Flesh met flesh, or the memory of it, and something in the air cracked open, releasing a faint shimmer of light. The bell tolled again. Once. Twice. Then silence. The bride leaned her head against his chest, her veil brushing his face like the wings of an insect. "Now we are married," she said. "The desert has what it wanted." "What did it want?" he asked. Her voice softened into a sigh. "To remember. To have something left that doesn't vanish when the sun rises." Around them, the air began to cool. The dunes flattened, turning to stillness. The altar sank slowly into the sand, as if exhaling for the last time. Thomas held her as the horizon dimmed. He no longer felt the need to breathe, nor the weight of his own body. There was only a rhythm, the faint, steady pulse of something shared. "I waited for you," she murmured. "I think I was waiting too," he said. The sand began to fall upward, drawn into the sky. The world inverted itself, light bleeding into shadow, until everything was neither day nor night but the calm in between. She lifted her face toward him once more. "When the house returns, you'll sleep. You'll forget the fire again. And then one day, when the wind calls your name, you'll walk back here, And we'll do it again." He nodded, though part of him wanted to protest. Yet the thought of resisting seemed almost cruel. This was all she had, and all he was. The veil drifted around them like smoke. Far away, faintly, the outline of the house reappeared, a mirage forming from the dying light. Its walls were white again. Its windows were waiting. "Come," she said, offering her hand. "Let's go home." They walked together across the soft, endless expanse, the sand whispering beneath their feet. The sky pulsed once more like the closing of an eye, and the house grew nearer with every breath. When they reached its door, it opened on its own, and the scent of lilies returned. Inside, everything was still. The marble shone. The air shimmered faintly. Two shadows entered, hand in hand, and disappeared down the corridor. The door closed quietly behind them. Outside, the desert stretched forever, untouched, asleep. The wind moved softly across the dunes, carrying the faint echo of a vow repeated somewhere beneath the earth. With this vow, we return, and in the heart of the house that remembered the bells tolled one last time, gentle and low, as if marking the end of a long, impossible dream. The night returned not with stars, but with embers. They fell from the sky like the memory of rain, soft, aimless, and glowing faintly, settling upon the sand, until the desert itself seemed to breathe with orange light. The house stood at its center again, perfect and silent, its white walls shining like bone under the dim breath of firelight. I remember thinking, it's too beautiful to burn, and yet beauty has never stopped anything from burning. Lilith moved through the rooms as though she were half asleep, trailing her hand along the pale walls. Everywhere her fingers passed, the plaster darkened. It began as a whisper of gray, then deepened, spreading like a bruise. I followed her without speaking, my own hands trembling not with fear, but with a strange anticipation, a sense that everything we had built, everything we had become, was now bending toward one inevitable act. "This is where it began," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the sigh of wind outside. "And this is where it has to end." I looked around. The parlor was immaculate again, table set for two, a candelabra gleaming with white wax, plates that reflected our faces in warped silver. But there was no warmth. The flames of the candles did not flicker. They stood still, like painted fire. Lilith turned to me. Her eyes glimmered faintly, not with light, but with depth, as if I could see the reflection of every life the desert had swallowed. "Do you know why it keeps rebuilding itself?" she asked. I shook my head. "Because memory refuses to die cleanly," she whispered. "It comes back in layers, smoke over ash, ash over bone, bone over silence." The floorboards groaned beneath us. I felt something stir beneath the house, a deep vibration, like the rumble of something immense waking from slumber. She took a step closer, her gown brushing against my legs. The fabric was still the color of twilight greenish blue, the same hue as the dress she wore the night we met. But now, at the hem, the color was darkening, seeping upward, as if the desert itself was claiming her, inch by inch. Her hand rose, pale and trembling. "Thomas," she said, "you must light it again." My heart stopped. "What?" "The house," she murmured. "You built it once, didn't you? Out of the memory of something you lost, out of guilt, out of the body of the desert itself. And now it's trapped, just as I am." I shook my head, but the truth coiled in my stomach like smoke. I'd built it, not with hammer or stone, but with remembering. The house was never real. It was a structure of longing, a shape given to remorse. "It burns," she said, "because it wants release." Outside, the wind was rising. The dunes hissed with motion, the air shimmering with dry heat. I looked through the window and saw the horizon glowing a thin red line, stretching endlessly in both directions. It was not the dawn. It was something else. Lilith stepped toward the hearth. "It's hungry," she whispered. It always was. And before I could stop her, she reached into the fire. Her hand sank into the coals as though into water, and when she drew it out, it held a flame small, pulsing, alive. The light from it danced across her face, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. Half human, half ash, features shifting like smoke caught in glass. "This is how we end it," she said. She pressed the flame into my palm. It did not burn. It remembered me. The air thickened. Every shadow in the room began to move, stretching upward, writhing against the walls, as though they too longed to escape. The candles melted in silence. The clock on the mantelpiece began to tick backward. And in the middle of it all, she stood perfectly still, her veil lifting as if by some invisible breath. "Burn it," she said again. I turned toward the nearest wall. My hand, the one that held the living ember, moved without my will. When it touched the plaster, the surface caught instantly. No smoke, no flame, just like a deep, slow bloom of crimson that spread like spilled blood. The house sighed. The sound was not of destruction, but of relief. It began to happen all at once. The white walls cracked, releasing black veins of fire. The floor rippled, breathing in heat. The ceiling sagged like wet paper. The portraits on the wall faces I never remembered painting smiled briefly before collapsing into ash. Lilith watched in silence. Her eyes glowed faintly gold, like sunlight through thin fabric. "Do you see now?" she asked. I wanted to answer, but the air was too thick. My lungs filled with something heavy, ancient. Smoke, yes, but also memory. Regret. The echo of 1,000 forgotten oaths. The room twisted. For a heartbeat, the fire didn't feel like destruction. It felt like resurrection. Each flame rose not to devour, but to reveal. Beneath the white plaster, beneath the wood, beneath even the foundation, I saw what the house truly was. Not a building, but a body. The ribs of the walls, the pulse in the hearth, the faint sigh of something immense and alive. And in its heart, at the center of the burning, I saw Lilith's reflection, vast and endless, her form rising through the flames, dissolving into them. She was not dying. She was returning. "Thomas," she whispered. Her voice filled the entire space now, echoing from the collapsing ceiling, from the moaning floor, from the sand itself. "When this is done, the desert will sleep again. But it will keep one dream ours." The roof cracked. The wind roared in, dragging with it the scent of iron and wildflowers, the same flowers she carried the night we met. I turned, trying to reach her, but my body was already fading, edges turning translucent, the heat pulling me apart like strands of thread. The last thing I felt was her hand on my chest. It wasn't a touch, it was an imprint. A warmth that sank inward, through bone and blood, until it reached the core of me and whispered something that was both command and blessing. "Burn with me." And I did. The house vanished in silence. No explosion, no collapse. Just a single pulse of light, soft and golden, spreading outward until it merged with the horizon. When I opened my eyes again, I was standing in the middle of the desert. There was no sign of the house, only a wide, perfect circle of white sand where it had stood. The moon was low and red, the sky trembling faintly. The wind moved gently, like fingers brushing through my hair. At my feet lay the veil half buried, fluttering faintly. I reached down and touched it. It was warm. In the distance, something moved, a silhouette, graceful and still, standing among the dunes. I couldn't see her face, but I didn't need to. I knew who she was. I called her name once, softly. The sound disappeared into the air. Then the horizon shimmered, and the shape was gone. Only the whisper remained. It came not from the wind, but from within me, from the part that had burned, the part that now refused to cool. With this vow, we return. The words rippled through the sand. The ground beneath me pulsed faintly, like breath, and for a long time, I simply stood there, surrounded by the quiet glow of the dying night, waiting for the dawn to come, though deep down, I already knew it wouldn't. The desert doesn't wake. It only remembers. I woke to silence. The kind of silence that doesn't come from the absence of sound, but from the death of motion, the stillness after something vast has ended. The kind of silence that makes you afraid to breathe, because even a heartbeat might break it. The desert stretched endlessly around me. The dunes had become smooth, as if some invisible tide had washed them clean during the night. The moon was gone, the stars pale and distant, and where the house had once stood, there was nothing but a hollow, a perfect circle of ash and silver sand. When I moved, the ground beneath me sighed. I don't know how long I'd been lying there. My clothes were burned but untouched, my skin gray with soot. I should have been dead. I think, in a way, I was. My name felt strange in my mouth, Thomas. I whispered it once, and it seemed to drift away, swallowed by the still air. It no longer belonged to me. It was a name from another life, a name that burned away with her. Lilith. Her name lived differently. It lingered, soft and warm, like the afterglow of a candle. I could still feel her fingers pressed to my chest, that final touch that had not destroyed but transformed me. The world smelled faintly of smoke and wildflowers. I followed it, not with purpose but instinct, like a sleepwalker chasing the echo of a dream. The dunes rose and fell in gentle waves, each one marked with faint streaks of black lines of cooled ash, like veins in marble. Beneath my bare feet, the sand was warm, almost pulsing. I thought I heard a heartbeat beneath it, slow and deep. Everywhere I looked, I saw traces of what had been. The faint outline of a wall, a half-buried fork, the shimmer of glass melted into strange, translucent shapes. The house had not died. It had only shed its body, and so had she. I walked until the horizon shifted again, a shimmer of white that wasn't sand. When I drew closer, I saw it was a tree. A tree, in the middle of the wasteland. Its bark was pale, almost silver, and its branches spread like delicate arms, each tipped with something that looked like glass petals. The ground beneath it was darker, richer, not sand, but soil. The air around it was cooler, tinged with the faint scent of rain that would never come. At its base lay something that caught the light, a fragment of fabric, greenish blue, the color of twilight. A dress. It was torn, but whole. The kind of contradiction that belonged to dreams. I knelt beside it and touched it with the tips of my fingers. The fabric pulsed faintly beneath my hand, and then I heard a voice. Not loud, not near, but everywhere. Do you see it now, Thomas? I froze. The voice was gentle, almost tender, as though spoken through the hush of falling snow. The fire doesn't destroy, she whispered. It remembers. The wind stirred, carrying with it the faint hum of something beneath the surface. Not words, but breath. I looked up. The branches of the tree swayed slightly, though no wind touched them. The glass petals trembled and gave off a faint sound, like the ringing of tiny bells. It wasn't a tree. It was her. The realization didn't come like shock. It came like understanding something you had always known. The sentinel of the wasteland, the bride of the desert, the flame that refused to die. She had become the first living thing this place had seen in centuries. Lilith, I said softly. My voice cracked on the name. The branches seemed to shiver. A light ran along their length, slow, golden, like the reflection of sunrise on water. I stepped closer, my hand outstretched, and felt warmth radiate from the trunk. I stayed, I whispered. Just like you said. The desert didn't answer. But I felt her presence shift, not gone, but within everything. The sand, the air, the warmth that hummed beneath my skin. She was no longer one thing. She was the quiet itself, the pulse that carried through the stillness, the kind of haunting that felt like comfort. I pressed my palm against the trunk. The bark gave slightly under my touch, like skin. My vision blurred. For a moment I saw her face in the glow, her lips parted, her eyes half closed, the faint smile that had never quite reached the surface in life. You burned the lie away, she murmured, and left only what we were. What are we? I asked. Remnants, she said. And remembrance. The wind stirred again. It carried whispers, voices that were not hers, but somehow part of her, threads of laughter, sighs, songs I had never heard before. I realized they were all the others the desert had taken. The forgotten, the lost, the ones who wandered too far and were never found. And she was keeping them, watching them, keeping me. The thought didn't frighten me. It soothed something old in me, the restless guilt that had followed me since the first time I laid eyes on her. The idea that I could atone by staying. I sat beneath a tree. The sand was cool now, the air humming gently. The horizon was pale, neither day nor night. I don't know how long I sat there. Time had lost its edges. I think I slept. Or maybe I simply stopped being awake. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't sure if I was breathing. The air moved through me like water, weightless. My hands were pale, faintly transparent. The fire in my chest, that ember she gave me, glowed dimly but steady. I looked up. The sky had turned violet. The tree glimmered faintly, shedding a fine dust of light that floated upward and vanished into the air. The petals were opening, one by one, releasing small threads of gold that drifted like ash into the vast silence. Each one that rose seemed to hum my name, and then hers. Thomas. Lilith. Thomas. Lilith. A vow, repeated endlessly, dissolving into the horizon. I stood and placed my hand against the trunk one last time. Will it ever end? I whispered. A pause, then a voice, faint as a sigh through long grass. No, but it will become quiet. And the light from the petals gathered around me, soft as snowfall. It settled on my shoulders, my hair, my lips. I closed my eyes. The air smelled of wildflowers again, though none grew here. I could still feel the faint rhythm beneath the sand, her pulse, the desert's heart, mine. It was all the same now. As the last of the light fell away, I felt myself drift, not away from her, but through her, into the stillness, into the endless, beautiful nothing. There, in the cradle of silence, I heard her final whisper. When the world forgets, the wasteland will bloom again. And when it does, we'll walk it, not as ghosts, but as the first dawn. I smiled, or something like it. The desert exhaled. The wind began again, gentle, endless, full of soft voices that no longer sounded like sorrow. And as I dissolved into the horizon, I realized she was never the curse. She was the memory of love that refused to die. The fire had gone out, but the warmth remained. The wasteland was no longer empty. And somewhere, in the hush between two heartbeats, the bride and the wanderer finally rested. The hunter's requiem. The forest never forgets. That's what the old men used to tell us when we were boys, hurling stones at birds or carving initials into the bark of living trees. Every cut, every scream, every sin, they'd say. The woods remember. I used to laugh. But now, after what happened with Caleb, I can't. It began the year the storms wouldn't stop. The rain soaked the roots of the redwoods, and the smell of sap hung thick as blood. I was a traveling carpenter, taking small repair jobs up and down the coast. When I reached the town of Alder Ridge, I didn't plan to stay long. But then Mrs. Ward came to find me. Her boy, she said, had been struck by something foul. Fever, nightmares, scratches on his skin that looked too straight, too deliberate. Their house was half rotten, the roof leaking from last winter's snow. She needed help fixing it, and maybe though she didn't say it, she hoped I could fix something else too. When I first saw Caleb, he was sitting by the window, his face turned toward the trees. The boy couldn't have been more than 16, yet his eyes had the same hollow blue as ice on a grave. A dozen traps leaned against the wall beside him, iron snares, bear jaws, wire loops. They gleamed in the dim light like polished bones. "You hunt?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He didn't answer, just smirked, the corner of his mouth twitching like he'd heard something I hadn't. Then he said, "The woods don't feed me anymore. They owe me." His mother scolded him for talking that way, but he only laughed to sound sharp enough to curdle milk. That night, I stayed in their spare room. The wind pushed through the cracks in the walls, whispering in the rafters like voices caught between prayer and threat. Around midnight, I heard something outside metal snapping. a shriek that sounded almost human. I went to the window. Beneath the trees, something moved, something crawling, dragging itself out of the darkness. I saw the glint of Caleb's lantern bobbing in the rain, and the faint outline of a struggling shape caught in one of his traps. He didn't kill it right away. The next morning, I found the trail of blood in the mud. Small prints fox, maybe led from the forest edge to the barn, and stopped there. Caleb's boots covered the rest. At breakfast, he was humming. His father, a lumberman, sat silently with his coffee. Mrs. Ward pretended not to notice when the boy's fingers twitched every time a crow cawed outside. Later, I went out to mend the roof. From up there, I could see the clearing behind the house, the traps arranged in a half circle like a shrine. In the center, nailed to a post, was something pale. I thought it was just hide at first. But when the wind turned, I saw the face. A fox's skull, bleached by rain, its empty sockets staring toward the woods. By the second night, the air felt heavier. My dreams were full of roots, wet and reaching, coiling around my ankles. And the sound, God, that sound, like claws scraping the floorboards from beneath my bed. When I woke, I found muddy paw prints leading from the door to the window. They stopped at the sill, where a single silver hair gleamed in the moonlight. That morning, Caleb didn't come to breakfast. His mother said he'd gone out before dawn. His father went to look, but came back white as the snow on the ridge. "He's out by the hollow," he said. Digging again. The hollow wasn't a place people went anymore. Folks said it was where the forest took back what it was owed. Hunters who disappeared. Travelers who never made it out. I followed the father down the trail, the smell of wet pine filling my lungs. The rain had stopped, but mist still clung to the ground like a shroud. We found Caleb crouched beside a fallen redwood. He was setting another trap, only this one wasn't for animals. It was huge, almost ritualistic, iron jaws buried in the soil, baited with something dark and glistening. "What are you doing, boy?" his father shouted. Caleb didn't look up. "He wants more," he said. "It's hungry." Before we could stop him, he drove his stake into the earth and whispered something under his breath. The wind changed direction. The birds went silent. And then, faintly through the rustle of leaves, I heard laughter. A woman's laughter. We dragged him home. He didn't fight us, just smiled that same thin smile and whispered, "She'll come tonight." That evening, I worked late by lantern light, trying to finish the repairs so I could leave before dawn. The rain began again, slow at first, then harder, beating against the roof like fists. From Caleb's room came a low murmur. Two voices. One his, one soft and lilting, like water moving through reeds. Mrs. Ward knocked on his door. "Caleb?" No answer. Then the laughter came again, closer, clearer. It wasn't joyful. It was the kind of laughter that follows the snap of a trap. When the door finally opened, a draft of cold air poured out, carrying with it the scent of wet fur and iron. Caleb stood there, eyes glassy, shirt stained with blood. Behind him, the candlelight flickered and danced across the floorboards except where it was swallowed by something darker. There were paw prints burned into the wood. That was the first night I understood what it means when the forest remembers. Because it doesn't forget cruelty. It waits. It learns your scent, your footsteps, the rhythm of your breathing. And when the time is right, it comes back not as beast, but as something older, something divine. I didn't sleep that night. None of us did. By dawn, the traps outside were empty. The woods were silent. But Caleb's window was open, and in his bed, I found only a few strands of silver hair. The rain had stopped. The sun broke through, golden and warm, but the world felt wrong, as if the light had arrived too late. And in the distance, just beyond the clearing, I thought I saw her. A woman standing in the mist, her dress pale as frost, her eyes bright as the reflection of firelight on steel. She raised a finger to her lips, as if to hush me. Then she vanished into the trees. When I was younger, I used to believe every storm had a voice. If you listened close enough, between the wind and the rain, you could hear it, something half-human, whispering bargains to anyone foolish enough to answer. After Caleb vanished, The rain wouldn't stop speaking. Days passed under a sky, the color of dead bark. The Ward family's house sat like a wound in the landscape, the smell of rot and iron seeping through the damp boards. Mrs. Ward prayed from dawn till dusk. Her husband hardly spoke at all. He just stood by the window, waiting for something neither of us could name. I stayed because I couldn't quite leave. Something in me, call it guilt, call it curiosity, kept me tethered to that house like a moth circling a flame. The forest beyond the field had grown quieter, as though holding its breath. Then one night, the rain stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any storm. You could hear the timbers creak, the nails sigh in the walls, even the heartbeat of the earth beneath your feet. That was when I saw her again. She stood at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the last row of stumps where the redwoods began. Her figure shimmered faintly, as if the air itself bent around her. Her dress clung to her body like mist, silver in the moonlight. But it was her eyes, those bright, cold eyes, that pinned me to the spot. She didn't move at first. Just watched me, like a predator gauging distance. Then she lifted her hand and beckoned. Against my better judgment, I went. The air was thick with pine resin and something else, something sweet, like decay hidden under perfume. When I reached her, she smiled. It was a slow, deliberate thing. And for a moment, I thought her teeth looked too sharp. "You were with him," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried, as if the forest itself spoke through her. "The boy who laid snares in my hollow." He swallowed hard. "Caleb?" She tilted her head. "He called himself that, yes. He promised me freedom, but promises made in cruelty are promises broken." Her words coiled in the dark like smoke. I couldn't tell if she was angry or sorrowful. Maybe both. "I don't understand," I said. She stepped closer. Her skin glowed faintly, pale as ash, her scent like wet earth after lightning. "He took the lives of my kin," she whispered. "He spilled their blood on sacred roots. So, I took what was his, a fair trade." Her fingers brushed mine, and the touch was ice. "What do you want from me?" The smile returned smaller this time, almost human. A carpenter knows the worth of balance. The living forget that every cut must be mended, every wound must close. I can't fix what he did. "No," she said softly, "but you can help me bury it." The trees shifted then, their trunks groaning like old bones. Somewhere in the darkness, something small yelped a sound halfway between animal and child. I glanced toward it, but when I looked back, she was gone. Only the scent of rain remained. When I returned to the house, Mrs. Ward was waiting by the fire. She looked at me as though she already knew where I'd been. "You saw her," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Her hands trembled as she poured me tea. "You shouldn't have gone, Caleb. Her voice broke. "He thought he could trap her. But she's not just an animal, you see. She's a spirit of the hollow, a keeper of what grows and dies. My husband told him to stop, but the boy, he liked the power, the screaming. He said the forest owed him its fear." The tea was bitter, metallic. I set it down. "And now?" She stared into the fire. "Now she takes what she's owed." That night I couldn't sleep. The rain had stopped, but I could still hear the rhythm of dripping somewhere deep within the walls, as if the house itself was bleeding. I must have drifted off eventually, because I woke to a whisper. "Come." It was her voice close, near my ear. The door was open, the wind moving through the curtains like pale hands. I rose, numb, and followed. Outside, the moon was veiled by clouds, turning everything the color of bone. The forest loomed ahead, silent but alive, the branches swaying without wind. As I walked, the air thickened. My breath came out white, and then I saw her again, this time kneeling beside a fallen tree, her hair tangled with leaves. She was digging. Beside her lay Caleb's traps, broken, twisted open like dead insects. Her bare hands clawed through the soil, revealing bones, tiny ones, delicate as glass. Fox bones. When she looked up, Her eyes glowed faintly. "Gold. Help me," she said. I knelt beside her, my heart hammering. The soil was wet and cold, clinging to my skin. We worked in silence, laying each bone gently into the hollow of the earth. For every one I placed, the forest seemed to exhale, the weight in the air lifting slightly. When the last bone was covered, she pressed her palms into the mound and whispered something in a language that felt older than the trees themselves. The ground pulsed once, faintly, and then stilled. She turned to me. "The dead is almost settled." Almost? Her gaze flickered toward the ward house. "He still breathes." I froze. "You mean Caleb?" She nodded. "His body sleeps. His spirit runs. But not far. He's caught between roots and ruin. I cannot touch him unless you lead him to me." I can't do that," said my voice breaking. "He's just a boy." She smiled sadly. So were the ones he snared. The silence that followed felt endless. The moon broke through the clouds, lighting her face, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. It wasn't human. Not entirely. The edges flickered, blurred, shifting between woman and fox, flesh and flame, and then she was gone again, leaving me alone by the mound. I returned to the house before dawn. Mr. Ward was already awake, sitting in the parlor with his shotgun across his knees. He didn't ask where I'd been. He didn't need to. "Something's moving out there," he said. I saw her by the tree line. Thought it was a dream, till the dog started howling. We sat in silence for a while. The only sound the tick of the clock and the low hum of the dying fire. "Do you believe in punishment, Mr. Ward?" I asked finally. He looked at me, eyes hollow. "I believe in consequence." Before I could respond, a sound rose from the forest, high, keening, almost beautiful, like a song made of grief. Mrs. Ward stumbled down the stairs, pale and trembling. "He's calling," she whispered. "I can hear him." We rushed to Caleb's room. The bed was empty again, sheets tangled like vines. The window hung open. Outside, the first light of dawn bled over the treetops. And from somewhere deep in the woods, the voice came again. Caleb's this time, faint but clear, crying for help. "Please, it hurts." Mrs. Ward bolted for the door. Her husband caught her arm, but she tore free. I followed without thinking, the cold morning air cutting into my lungs. The voice led us to the hollow. The mist there was thick as milk, and the ground soft beneath our boots. We called his name, again and again. Then we found him, or what was left of him. He was lying among the roots, his eyes wide open, his lips moving soundlessly. Around him, the earth was scarred with strange marks, circles, lines, symbols carved deep into the soil. Mrs. Ward fell to her knees, sobbing. Her husband lifted the boy's head, but Caleb didn't seem to see him. He just kept whispering one word over and over. "Fox?" The air grew colder. I felt it then, the shift, the trembling beneath the ground, and behind us, in the mist, two golden eyes flared. "Mrs. Ward screamed. Mr. Ward raised his gun, but the moment the shot rang out, the forest seemed to swallow the sound whole. When the smoke cleared, she was gone. All that remained was a patch of silver fur drifting down like ash, and Caleb staring blankly into the sky, whispering, "She made me promise." He survived the night, though I can't say how. The doctors came, said it was shock, fever, madness, but I knew better. His soul was tethered to something now, something older than prayer. Sometimes, when I dream, I still hear her voice in the rain. Not angry, not cruel, just patient, waiting for balance. There are nights in these woods when the moon seems too close to the earth, so near you can almost hear it breathing. On those nights, the redwoods hum. Their branches twist as though whispering to one another, and the air carries that faint scent of copper and rain, like the world itself remembers something it wishes to forget. It was under such a moon that Caleb began to wither. He did not die, not properly. His body lived, fed by his mother's trembling hands. and the broth she spooned into his mouth each morning. But his eyes were somewhere else, tracking something invisible, something only he could see. They said he would sometimes laugh in his sleep, sometimes weep, and once, in the small hours, I heard him whisper, "She's coming back for the rest." I was still staying at the ward house, though by then I should have left. The forest had started closing in again. Saplings sprouted overnight, their roots creeping up the walls of the barn. The animals had fled. Even the crows' bold, stubborn things no longer came near. Mr. Ward pretended not to notice. He worked the fields, axe in hand, though there was nothing left to harvest. His wife spent her days at Caleb's bedside, praying to every god she could name. And I kept watch. I told myself it was compassion that kept me there. In truth, it was fear, the kind that roots itself deep, the kind that compels you to see the ending for yourself. It began with the footprints. I found them at dawn, pressed into the mud behind the shed, small, delicate, and barefoot. They led from the tree line straight toward the window of Caleb's room. The strange thing was, the earth hadn't been disturbed anywhere else. No approach, no departure. Only the prints themselves, like memories left behind after a dream. When I followed them, they stopped beneath the window and vanished, as though the creature had simply dissolved into air. I told Mr. Ward. He grunted, spat tobacco into the dirt, and said, "It's the rain." But there hadn't been rain in 3 days. That night, the moon turned blood orange. It was Mrs. Ward who heard it first, the sound of something scratching at Caleb's window. She screamed, and I ran from my room, my lantern swinging wildly. The scratching stopped before I reached the door. Inside, Caleb was sitting upright. His face was turned toward the window. His lips curled into a smile that didn't belong to him. "She called," he said softly. "Said she forgave me." Mrs. Ward was crying, clutching his arm. "Who, Caleb? Who are you talking about?" He turned toward her, and for a brief, terrible instant, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not light, reflection. As if something inside him were staring back. "She wants me to follow," he said. And then he lay down and fell silent again. The next morning, we found the forest alive. I don't mean alive as in growing, I mean awake. The trees leaned, their bark split and weeping sap like blood. The moss shivered underfoot. Even the air had changed, thick with the scent of iron and smoke. And there, between the trunks, I saw her, the fox woman. She stood beneath a shaft of light, her figure half concealed by mist. Her eyes gleamed gold, and her hair hung wet against her shoulders. But what chilled me most was that she wasn't alone. Shapes moved behind her, many shapes. Small, quick, shadows with teeth. They darted between the trees like whispers, their forms melting and reforming, animal and human and neither. She looked at me then and smiled, the smile of someone who had already decided what would happen. That evening, I gathered what few things I owned. "Leaving?" Mr. Ward asked, though his tone was flat, empty. "I think it's time," I said. He nodded. "Take the boy with you." I stared at him. "He can't travel. He can't stay," he said. "None of us can. That thing's coming for him. I see her every night now, standing out there by the stump. Same place where he set those traps. You think I don't know this is punishment?" He slammed the butt of his rifle into the floorboards. "Go. Take him before she decides the rest of us are part of it." But I didn't, because deep down, I knew there was no outrunning a curse like this. The night of the reaping moon came 3 days later. The sky was wrong, clear, yet suffocatingly heavy. The moon hung low and enormous, its light soaking everything in a pale, feverish glow. The forest hummed again, low and resonant, like a choir breathing in unison. I stood at the window, unable to sleep. Caleb was murmuring in his room, his voice rising and falling like prayer. Then, a sound. The front door creaking open. I rushed downstairs. The door hung wide, the wind curling through the hall. Outside, footprints bare, again led into the woods. Caleb was gone. Mrs. Ward's scream tore through the air, thin and sharp. Mr. Ward grabbed his lantern and gun, and we ran. The forest, swallowed us whole. We followed the footprints through the ferns, through the wet soil that glowed faintly under moonlight. Branches brushed my face, and every so often I thought I saw movement ahead, flashes of white fabric like a dress trailing behind. The sound of running water grew louder, and then we reached it. The hollow. There she stood, the foxwoman, radiant in the moonlight, her fur catching silver light as her form shifted, blurred, danced between shapes. Caleb knelt before her, trembling, his hands raised like a supplicant before a god. Mrs. Ward screamed his name. He didn't turn. "She's taking him," Mr. Ward hissed, raising the rifle. But before he could fire, she looked at him. Just a glance and the air thickened. The wind died, and the sound of the forest folded in on itself. Mr. Ward's body went rigid. The rifle dropped from his hand. His breath came out in a gasp, and then he collapsed. Eyes wide, mouth open. "Mrs." Ward fell beside him, sobbing. "No. Please, not him, too." The foxwoman turned her gaze to me. "You came back," she said. I could barely speak. I didn't know what else to do. She tilted her head. "There's always a choice. You, of all men, should know that." Her form shimmered woman, fox, flame each heartbeat, revealing a different truth. "He broke the covenant," she said, pointing at Caleb. "He took, without giving. Now, I take." I stepped forward. "Then take me instead." Enter. The forest exhaled. Even the moon seemed to hesitate. Her eyes studied me for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she said, "Would you carry the memory?" "What do you mean?" "Every spirit born of blood must have a keeper," she said. "Someone to remember, someone to mourn. I cannot move beyond unless someone stays." I didn't understand then, not fully, but I nodded. Her smile was sad, almost tender. "Then listen well, mortal. The forest does not hate. It balances. You will remember what he has done, and you will keep the silence he broke." She turned toward Caleb, who was weeping now, his body shaking. She placed her hand upon his head. Light burst from the contact, white, searing and soundless. When it faded, Caleb was gone. Only the fox remained, her fur silver, and her eyes gentle, almost human. She approached me, pressed her forehead against my hand, and whispered, "Thank you." Then she turned, trotted into the dark, and vanished among the trees. We found Mr. Ward still breathing but weak. Mrs. Ward refused to leave him. They buried Caleb, or what was left of him, in the clearing behind the house, beneath the tree where the traps once hung. By morning, the forest had fallen silent again, and when the sun rose, the roots that had been creeping toward the house had stopped. I thought it was over. I was wrong. Weeks later, after the Wards moved away, I stayed behind to repair the place. I told myself it was penance. The nights were quiet, save for the occasional cry of an owl or the rustle of leaves. But sometimes, just before dawn, I'd hear the faint padding of paws on the porch. A fox's steps. Soft, careful. Once, I found a single silver hair on the windowsill. Another time, when the moon was high, I saw her shadow through the fog, small, lithe, gliding through the garden where the graves lay. And every time I heard her, the same whisper echoed through my mind. Remember. I still dream of her. In my dreams, the forest is endless, the moon eternal. Caleb walks beside me, young again, unafraid. And in the distance, the foxwoman watches us, silent, patient, waiting for the day when the last trespass of humankind will be forgotten. They call this valley the Hollow now. No one hunts here. No one dares to build. And when the storms roll through, the wind carries her song, a low, keening requiem that threads through the trees like smoke. A warning, a memory, a promise kept. The forest had gone silent again, the way it does after a storm has eaten everything alive. The carpenter I, the one who had come only to mend a roof, had not slept since the lightning split the ridge and the boys' screams tore through the redwoods. Caleb still breathed, yes, but only in the mechanical rhythm of something that has forgotten why it should stay alive. The doctor said, shock. The mother said, punishment. And the father, he said nothing at all. That night, the rain returned. Not a drizzle, a constant whisper, like the sound of something dragging itself through leaves. I sat by the hearth, staring at the embers. I could hear him upstairs, not moving, not moaning, just breathing slow, deliberate, as though the forest itself was breathing through him. Outside, the hounds refused to howl. When the clock struck 2, the silence split open. A hum deep and human swelled from upstairs, not Caleb's voice, not quite, but something shaped like it. A low chant, repeating 3 notes over and over. Naveen, Naveen. The words were soaked in mud, in fever. The mother gasped. The choir has come, she whispered, clutching her rosary tight enough to draw blood. I rose. My hands trembled as I reached for the lantern. What do you mean, the choir? She didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the window, where beyond the glass I could see movement, faint shapes between the trees, pale and wet, like the trunks were growing faces. Then came the sound again, but this time, there were many voices. Men, women, children, all whispering the same words, some close, some impossibly far. The cadence was uneven, chaotic, a congregation without rhythm, without faith, a hollow choir. I climbed the stairs, each step groaning like something alive beneath my feet. The closer I came to Caleb's room, the thicker the air grew like sap. I could smell iron, old fur, and smoke. His door was open, the window wide, the bed empty. Only the fox pelt remained, the same silver hide he'd once nailed to the barn wall as a trophy. Now it hung limp over the bed frame, soaked and twitching, as if something beneath the skin were trying to wake. Caleb, I whispered. The lantern flickered. He stood at the window, barefoot, eyes milk white. His skin looked translucent under the lightning flashes, and his hands, they were clawed, his nails blackened as though he'd been digging through ash. They're singing to me, he said softly. Can't you hear them? The forest remembers every sound, every scream. I stepped closer. You need to rest. Whatever this is, it'll pass. He tilted his head. The smile that came next was too still, too gentle. You're wrong. They've come to collect. End quote. And then he turned and leapt from the window. The forest swallowed him whole. I chased, stumbling through mud and roots, the lantern swinging wild light over the trees. The voices surrounded me now, swelling in the rain, dozens, hundreds, none human. It was not language, but grief, the sound of every throat ever slit, every breath ever stolen by the hands of men who called it sport. Through the fog I saw them, foxes, dozens of them, silver and gray, their eyes glowing like candle flame. They stood in a ring, unmoving, their tails flicking in unison like a heartbeat. In their center, Caleb knelt, his body arched back in convulsion. Above him, the foxwoman stood. Her form flickered at one moment, a woman in tattered lace. At another, a creature built of fur and bone, her face torn into a calm, cold grin. She raised her hand, and the chant ceased. You traded breath for blood, she said. Now the forest demands its hymn. Caleb whimpered, choking on rain. Please. I didn't mean. The foxwoman stepped closer, her feet leaving no prints. Every snare sings, boy. Every howl echoes. You fed on suffering until it became your name. Her other hand reached out, fingers sinking into his chest like smoke. The air trembled. Caleb screamed a sound too deep for a human throat. From the trees, the foxes began to keen, not in rage, but in something older, more sacred. Their cries merged into harmony. It was beautiful, terrible, a requiem. I wanted to move, to run, to shout, to do something. But the roots beneath my boots had curled around my ankles. The earth was holding me still. Caleb's body shuddered. His chest opened like bark, splitting in winter. From the wound, light spilled out golden, pulsing, then dimming into ember. The foxwoman caught it. cradling it like a dying bird. "It is done," she murmured. "The song is mended." Then she looked at me and smiled. "Tell them," she said, her voice shifting between growl and whisper. "Tell them the forest still hungers." The next blink she was gone. So were the foxes. Only Caleb remained pale, still, eyes open to the rain. When I returned to the house, the parents were waiting by the fire. They didn't ask. They already knew. The mother wept into her hands. The father took a long breath and looked toward the trees. "He'll never leave this place," he said. "None of us will." Outside, the wind carried the faintest echo of the hollow choir, now distant, fading. But if you listened long enough, you could still hear it. The rustle of tails, the hum of roots, the hymn of the redwoods as they swallowed another soul whole. I left the next morning. At the edge of the forest, I turned once more. The fog hung low. The trees seemed taller, and on one branch, a silver fox sat watching me, its fur shimmering like wet moonlight. It blinked once slowly and then disappeared into the undergrowth. The sound followed me for miles, a whisper, light and endless. "Naveen, Naveen." The forest, still singing for the boy who thought himself a hunter, and I, the last witness, could only listen, knowing that someday the forest would sing for me too. The forest never truly forgets the sound of a scream. It only learns to hum around it, until the wind and rain carry it away like pollen. Months have passed since the night the choir sang. The town has moved on, as towns always do, by burying what it can't explain. They buried Caleb near the edge of the redwoods, under a tree that leaned toward the east, its roots exposed like frozen veins. I helped him lower him down. No priest came. The rain served as one. The mother said it was enough. The father said nothing at all. I left Redwood Hollow soon after, but the forest followed me not in body, but in breath. Every plank I hammered, every saw I lifted, seemed to whisper that same sound. Naveen. At night, I heard it again behind the walls, beneath the floorboards, humming through the bones of my house. Sometimes I thought it was Caleb's voice. Other times it was hers, the fox woman, singing the boy to sleep over and over, long after the soil had claimed his face. Sleep became a negotiation. When it came heavy, full of fog, full of claws. The dream always began the same way. I was walking down a corridor made of trees. Their trunks arched above me like ribs. Light filtered through. Not sunlight, but something colder. A silver pulse, faint and rhythmic, like the beat of an enormous, hidden heart. The air was thick with fur and ash. Every breath tasted of blood that had forgotten its name. Then I'd see him, Caleb, standing at the end of the path. Still a boy, but thinner, transparent, as though the wind might carry him off at any moment. His eyes were open, but they no longer looked human. They were pools of reflection, mirrors to everything around him. "You're still here," I would say, though I never meant to speak. He would tilt his head. That same small gesture from the night of the lightning. "She's not done," he would whisper. "The forest never finishes its song." Then, behind him, the choir would begin again. Not the wild chaos of that night. This was different, slower, reverent, a requiem for something sacred and broken. Each voice rose from the ground. I could feel them before I could hear them, the tremor of hooves, the hush of wings, the hush of fur brushing against roots. And in that great gathering of unseen throats, I heard the names of every creature he'd ever harmed. They came one by one, in tones that seemed to echo from the marrow of the earth. Fawn, crow, hare, fox, fox, fox. The last three lingered, folding into one another until the sound became one long breath that filled the forest and emptied me at once. Then I would wake my throat raw, my chest heavy with the weight of air that didn't belong to me. It was winter when I returned. I told myself I only wanted to see the trees again to prove they were still just trees. But the road that led to Redwood Hollow was no longer the same. The path had narrowed, the branches leaning low, heavy with frost and moss that moved slightly, as if breathing. The house stood empty. The windows were shattered, the roof half collapsed. Inside, everything smelled of pine tar and thyme. I found the mother's rosary hanging on a nail, blackened from the storm. The father's chair still faced the window, as if waiting for a view that never came. On the floor, a single footprint, small, barefoot, leading toward the woods, and then the sound came again, faint, gentle. Not from the forest this time, but from below, the cellar. I lifted the hatch. The air that rose was cold and damp, smelling of soil and old prayers. My lantern's light trembled as I descended the steps. The cellar was mostly empty, save for one corner where something glimmered in the dirt. A small wooden box, carved with leaves and foxtails. When I opened it, the wind in the room shifted. The lantern flickered, dimmed, and for a moment, everything stilled as though the forest above had paused to listen. Inside the box lay a silver pelt, folded neatly, still warm to the touch. Beneath it, a lock of hair, human, fair, tied with a black ribbon, and beneath that, a heart, small, preserved in wax, still beating faintly, though no blood remained in it. Then, from the shadows, a voice not cruel, not angry, just infinite. He was not the first, she said. I turned. The fox woman stood in the dark, her eyes glowing faintly amber. This time, she did not hide her form. One side was human, pale, fragile, beautiful. The other, furred and wild, her smile stretched in both tenderness and teeth. Nor will he be the last, she continued. Men think the forest is theirs to tame. They forget who sang it into being. Her gaze drifted to the box. He asked me for mercy. I gave him eternity. He will feed the choir until the last root rots. I swallowed. Why show me this? She stepped closer, her breath cold against my face. Because you listened, she whispered. You pitied what you should have feared. And the forest remembers kindness too. She reached out, her hand clawed, trembling, and pressed her palm against my chest. I felt something stir beneath my ribs, an ache that wasn't pain, a rhythm that didn't belong to me. Then she was gone. I awoke outside, beneath the same leaning tree where Caleb had been buried. The dawn was pale and thin, the ground soft with dew. In the distance, I could hear the forest breathing steady, alive, almost forgiving. I placed the box back into the soil, beneath the roots, and whispered a prayer I didn't understand. The earth accepted it, closing over with the quiet certainty of a grave that had been waiting for too long. And then I heard it faint at first, then swelling. The choir, the hollow choir, but now it was softer, almost peaceful, a hymn without grief. It rose through the trees, winding through fog, through bark, through sky, and for a moment, I could almost see them not as ghosts, but as light. Foxes running through air, the boy among them, no longer hunted, no longer afraid. Their song was the pulse of the land itself, a requiem and a lullaby in one, the forest mourning and forgiving in the same breath. As I turned to leave, the wind brushed against my neck, carrying one final whisper. Naveen, Naveen. I didn't look back. Some things aren't meant to be watched twice, but I swear, as the road curved out of the woods and the world brightened again, I heard the faint crack of a branch behind me, followed by soft, deliberate steps, and then silence, the kind of silence only a forest knows, the silence that comes after a prayer has been answered, and before another one is born. If you're still awake, then maybe you've heard it too, that low hum behind the static, the one that starts when the story ends. They say it's just interference. I say it's memory, looping back to find you. So when the lights go out and the building goes quiet, I don't rush to clock out. Listen carefully, because the next dispatch might have your name on it.